Hi, everybody. I'd like to convene the April 5th, 2020 meeting of the Brattleboro Select Board. Do we know for a fact that this meeting has been properly warned, Peter?
Yes, we do. It has.
Thank you. As our first act of business, we'd like to approve the minutes. If anyone has a motion for that.
I move to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Thank you. Ian has moved to approve our minutes from April 21st, 2020. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. That's 5-0. And the first order of business, or second, I should say, is chair's remarks. I really don't have any expanded remarks. I just wanted to say that I continue to see wonderful examples of strength in our community and also kindness to others. And I just love little stories. I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later. But I just thank everyone for their patience, because I know some of our changed circumstances these days can really try our patience on a professional and a personal level. So I thank everybody for being patient with not only our town staff, but yours truly and everyone you see before you tonight. The next order of business is select board comments. I'm sorry, manager's comments. I'm going to go to Peter Elwell.
Thank you, Tim. I do have brief comments tonight. I'd like to just speak about the vandalism on the Veterans Memorial that occurred this past weekend and put that in a bit of context. And then I'll save the rest of my remarks for the business items we have on your agenda later this evening. The main thing I want to convey to the community is that there is actually some action being planned to follow up on the research that's been done by the students and the Historical Society. And it's unfortunate that combination of circumstances resulted in that not being more publicly known earlier, and I've got some responsibility for that. I got an additional, I'd had some a meeting with the students and some discussions with Historical Society members back in the winter. And we had talked about a way to move forward. They were continuing with their research. Yes.
Can you back up a little bit, Peter, and tell people what students, what research, what vandalism?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. I was actually kind of rushing to keep this short since it's town manager's comments, but the broader context will help people, I'm sure, if they don't already know the backstory. So there is a group of students at BAMS who have done research together with their teacher, I believe, or at least a teacher at BAMS, a social studies teacher, Joe Rivers. Joe is also on the board of the Historical Society and has worked together with the students to really carefully, thoroughly, in a very professional way, in the way that professional historians would, using source documents that go back to the time of the Civil War and the late 19th century here in Brattleboro and elsewhere in Vermont. They've used these source documents to research and confirm that the Civil War monument on the Common in Brattleboro is incomplete. It references a certain number of soldiers who were from Brattleboro who fought in the Civil War, and it references a number of those soldiers who died. And it doesn't represent all of the Brattleborians who did serve. And initially it was believed that all of the people who had been left off were men of color who had been soldiers who served in the Union Army. The fuller story is more complicated than that, and I think it would not serve us all well to take a deep dive into the fuller story right now. But the students have been continuing their research, and what they have found is that even with what they have discovered, they can confirm unequivocally that there are a number of omissions, and that the omission of people of color was in fact a part of this story and an important part of this story. To the degree that that involved racism, it also involved classism. And what they're finding is that there's also a number of white men who served either on their on their own behalf or on behalf of others who bought out of the service, bought out of the obligation, who were people of limited means who were under-recognized, went unrecognized, went undercounted in this census of who had represented Brattleboro in the Civil War. If I try to go any further than that, I'm going to get into dangerous territory where I'm not accurately paraphrasing what's come from the students. But the point I'd like to underscore here, I'd like to underscore two things. One is that the omission is absolutely a matter of fact. The details of the omission is still being researched, and therefore the corrective action we will ultimately take isn't 100% clear yet. There will be some additional research. There will need to be some collaborative work with people in the community and the folks who have done the research to decide sort of what feels like the best way forward to correct this error. And ultimately, I envision coming to the select board with the Historical Society, the students, people, individuals and organizations representing veterans groups and folks who stand up on behalf of people of color and other marginalized populations in our community and our society. And I'm hoping actually that what this becomes is an opportunity for us together in our community to rally around the understanding that history isn't always as it has been presented to us, and that it's important for us to find the truth as best we can and speak that truth to each other and out to the world. And so that's going to take us a little more time. I had received an update. It was not the definitive closure to the matter, but it was an update from the students just about the time COVID was beginning. It was in the first week of March. And I regret that I didn't do some sort of an update at that time to you and to the community where people would have known that this work was underway and that we were aspiring to find the right way forward to do something that was properly corrective. I didn't, and some individual made an unfortunate choice to protest in a manner that was meant to call attention to this, and in the process was very degrading to veterans and others in terms of how that message was conveyed this past weekend to the community. We've acted quickly. The town staff who deal with acts of vandalism and graffiti around town were able to clean the monument quickly. By the way, it's not the same monument. The one that needs correcting is the obelisk that dates back to the 1880s. The more recent granite monument that represents or recognizes rather soldiers who served and died in wars since then, the two world wars and others. That's the monument that was defaced this weekend. But we were able to quickly clean that up. So that piece is, I hope, a minor blip in all of this, and it's behind us. I think what remains is an opportunity for us as a community to come together and find something that's really informative and an opportunity for us to learn and grow and accomplish a greater degree of justice in this monument, in this recognition for service to the community and the country in a way that we'll find our way forward together. I think that's going to take a while. I don't know when we'll be back for public consideration of a proposed action. But in the meantime, I intend to keep working with the students and the Historical Society, and I believe there'll be opportunities to work with veterans groups and other groups to bring this all together.
Thank you, Peter. Daniel, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I just a real quick question. Are we 100% certain that the more modern monument is accurate and fully complete?
I'm not 100% certain of that. I have a greater confidence in that because there was a good bit of work done in the creation of that in much more recent times. But that's not to say that all of that was done exactly right or, completely. And so we'll double check on that as well. Yeah, we'll make sure that this is complete. I should also say the one thing that I think is clear going forward, there's a lot that's not in terms of the details of this, but from a historic preservation point of view, it's really important whether you're dealing with architecture or whether you're dealing with historical facts and information, to not attempt to rewrite what happened back in the 1880s, but rather to state in the 2020s the appropriate corrective message. And so I don't know yet what that's going to look like. We'll work on that together, but there's been some talk about whether the plaque on the obelisk ought to be changed. And it's pretty clear best practice in this kind of situation that you don't change what the people in 1888 or 1886 or sometime around then decided to do, because they decided that and that's what it is. But rather you state what was incomplete about that and how we in the 2020s decided to do a different recognition right nearby so that it all can be part of the same learning process for people who come by and read the plaques and understand what happened.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for that last comment too. I think for me, I can get personally kind of emotional about the issue when it happened. I had a brother of mine died in service to our country, and so it hits very close to home. And I know what a lot of veterans and people who've served and are currently serving go through when they see something like vandalism against a monument like this, which really should never have anything to do with the very correct argument or debate that we should have about correcting past monuments and updating with an additional plaque or that sort of thing. So it can be a very emotional moment for people, and I just hope everybody can take a deep breath, consider that everybody has their things going on, and just again be kind, like I mentioned at the beginning of the comment period. But anyway, it was tough for some people. I'm sure a lot of people didn't even see it go by, but it was tough for some of our community members. So are we going to, did you have additional that you wanted to? Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So I want to just move on to fellow select board members' comments and or committee reports. I'm not sure a lot of committee action going on right now. Liz, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that during this crisis, many nonprofit organizations and private individuals have stepped up to assist in various ways. And I'm mentioning them even though these are not town initiatives, because I want to make sure that as many people as possible are aware of these initiatives. And if you are in a position to assist by way of volunteering or donating your time or funds, but most especially, if you are in need in the community, please contact one of these groups that might help you and your family. And I have a list, but I think I'll mention things briefly. And if my fellow select board members know more particulars, please chime in. The first one that I wanted to mention is the Brattleboro Area Mutual Aid, or BAMA. And this is a group that was formed specifically to provide mutual aid. And what they did was Jen Jacobs, Aaron O'Keefe, and Angela Gray spearheaded this effort. And they broke the community into over 24 neighborhoods, and there's point people in each neighborhood, and they provide mutual aid. If you need help or if you can give help, you can be matched up. And they're also branched out to provide gardening and tech support to the community. So if you would like to help them, like to sign up, or need some help, please go to Google Brattleboro Area Mutual Aid. Another thing that's interesting is this new call to action series. It's a podcast with Peter Fish Case and BCTV, and you could find that. There's some interesting interviews with people in the community, including town officials. But one of the big efforts that is really worth mentioning is Groundworks, and Rihanna Kendrick, who is the Operations Director of Groundworks, and she's also the chair of the Southern Windham County Continuum of Care. And they can have a connection of all the key stakeholders and addressing the needs of the homeless during the COVID-19 response. And they've housed folks at motels and continue to provide support for them ongoing. And so one of the things that you could do if you would like to volunteer is to call them and see if you can volunteer there, perhaps cook a meal. That's always welcome. And that's a consortium of, oh gosh, more than a dozen 8 organizations, including Winston Prouty and the Women's Freedom Center and the AIDS Project and the Agency of Human Services and Youth Services, a very long list of very dedicated people who are coordinating whatever help that people might need in this emergency. Another thing I wanted to mention is our state legislative team. Emily Kornheiser, Molly Burke, and Tristan Tolino have online meetings every Saturday. And if you need assistance, please contact them. Also, Becca Blount and Jeanette White are assisting not only individuals navigating the federal and state programs, but also they've helped Brattleboro and other municipalities with legal issues as they arise that the state needs to address. Then there's also meals. The school and various food banks are providing meals for people who are in need. And Sevka has done an amazing job. I think Daniel will talk about that. And then there's essential child worker childcare. And there's also the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation's Regional COVID-19 Business Resiliency Program. And that program will match a business owner with someone who will help us, help you navigate the various small business loans and unemployment and so forth. The United Way also has a list and a way to volunteer. And there's a very complete list that the Windham Regional Commission has prepared, which lists all sorts of nonprofits for basic needs, food, shelter, various, and then a variety of suggestions for volunteering and donations, as well as whatever need the community might have for food or shelter. Please go to their extensive list. And if there's others who'd like to chime in.
Does anybody want to chime in to Liz's very helpful, extensive but still partial list? I guess Daniel had his hand up first.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to kind of point out to folks that the Brattleboro Town website has links to many of these things on its homepage. If you go to the resources for individuals and families, there's lots of good information to be found there. I wanted to say something that was not adding on to what Liz was talking about, because I thought we were going to talk a little bit more about COVID later on. I wanted to kind of flag up the Brattleboro Historical Society's online kind of audio, I don't know what you'd call them. I mean, I guess you'd call them podcasts, right? They're mini podcasts. And if you go to soundcloud.com and just kind of type in Brattleboro Historical Society, you'll find like this really, really rich bunch of, recordings that have been made, I think mostly in collaboration with students from the middle school and, the Historical Society. And so when I was learning about the monument issue, I went there and listened to some of them, and they were really, really great. And there's a bunch of them about all kinds of different Brattleboro topics. So I just wanted to point that out to folks.
You're right, those are great. I think Brandy, did you have your hand up real quickly?
I had my hand up, but I wasn't going to chime in on anything Liz said because I feel like she really covered it. I was going to chime in just on my own. So if somebody else is going to chime in on Liz, I don't mind deferring.
Okay, I had one small thing. And Ian, did you want to chime in on Liz's points about our community members?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Tim?
No. Well,
The only other one I would mention is Vermont Legal Aid has
Oh, for God's sakes, yes.
a very, very comprehensive list of, oh man, whatever you could think could be affected by COVID-19. And I would encourage people, if they have any kind of question on something in that area, to go to that resource. It is very helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
that's great. Thank you, Ian. My small thing was that I was going to give a shout out to Post 5 of American Legion, who actually has something called a buddy check. And I like the name of it anyway. But the one thing that impressed me, it's one of these Google Docs where you can go and participate and let people know, that you could use a phone call or whatever. But one of the questions on it was, who else might you know that could use a phone call who won't admit it? And I thought that was a great way to phrase it, because that's part of our community support is kind of, there's always people that really could use a hand with something and just don't want to go ahead and admit that kind of thing. So I like that part of the buddy check system they have at Post 5. So, and return to some other topics for the board members, or?
Well, I do want to say something that wasn't in the thread, and I want to say, as we know, there's been some restrictions kind of lifted over the past few days, and some of us are kind of venturing a little bit more into places that are outdoor spaces, like gardening centers and other stores. And I, for one, on a personal level, but I'm going to use this platform to say, I'm going to be really looking to stores that are encouraging social distancing, where customers are being encouraged to respect 6 feet or more. And I'm frankly going to be looking for places where employees and as many customers as possible are wearing masks. And today I had a really wonderful encounter at a shop that I went to locally where everybody was wearing masks. People were kind of bobbing and weaving in a very polite and lighthearted way when they were coming down the same aisle, and everybody was really respectful and patient. And that's the kind of place that I'm going to be looking to frequent. And I would really encourage, as we start opening businesses, for people to think, maybe not, even if your belief isn't in the mask system, what is your reputational risk and what is it worth? And how do you want to help people feel comfortable? Because I, for one, am the kind of customer that I'm going to be looking for a specific kind of responsibility during this time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I like the way. Daniel, did you have something?
I just wanted to add on. I'm totally on board with you, Brandy. I'm really, really comfortable in some places. I went out today more than I've been out in weeks because I kind of had to, and I was comfortable in some places and other places less so. And so, I think I didn't come from this country. We don't have such a big deal about, liberty and whatnot in the UK. It's not kind of our thing. And so I don't have that cultural upbringing. I want people to be safe. I want our community to be safe. And the way that we can help each other stay safe is by wearing masks when we're out and about. And I know it's an inconvenience and it might feel silly to some people, but I think, safety is what I want.
Yeah, well said. And if you don't mind, I'll just chime in very quickly just to advocate for, please everyone understand that you cannot keep a mask on a 2-year-old. I doubt you can keep a mask on a 3-year-old. on this, but
You can put it on a 5-year-old, but a 7-year-old is really sassy, and he might say, "I don't know why it has to cover my nose."
yeah. But the reason I bring that up is just, I mean, obviously there's humor there, and people do understand it, I think. But I was actually at the store today, and someone with a mask was getting, for me, uncomfortably close, and I have a pretty good tolerance for, 5, 6, 4 feet, even if you're just staying away. But that fed into my fear that I have that people, when they put their mask on, they think they don't need to maintain the distance. And I plead with everyone to understand that the mask is not a substitute for distance. It is protecting your friends and neighbors when you have to be closer than you're comfortable with, but it is absolutely not any substitute. So you need to be doing both, 6 feet or more and a mask, please, for everybody. It just really helps everyone feel much more comfortable, and that way everyone can participate in situations where we have to be closer together. All right, so is that it for our comments and committee reports for the board? Getting a thumbs up from Ian, thank you, everybody. So we are now in the point where we have public participation. I'm reading my notes wrong on the wall there. And I have one person who has asked to say something, and it's Tom Costello. So Patrick, the person behind the curtain, could you help Tom come up in our feed? If Tom, you'd like to turn on your camera, or if you wouldn't, you could just turn on your microphone. Hello.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the board. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak a little bit to you. And beyond that, thank you for serving us all so well. I'm a veteran, a commander of Post 5 American Legion, grateful with a history of service to our town and to our board here over a period of 40 years. Over that time, many years ago, I was taught that the caliber of service, public service in Brattleboro is a little above anywhere else in the state. And I can report to you that it is today, and we're very grateful for all that you're doing. We're familiar with the present subject of the Civil War. 5 years ago, on May 24th, 2015, we had a event, which was a number of seminars downtown and Howard Coffin banquet at night. And among those presenters were Professor Joe Rivers and Professor Bill Holliday. It was an in-depth, broad discussion of our Civil War. And we're also familiar through our work with those who have died more recently. And in November of that year, we had an event called Honor, and those are for the young men who died in Vietnam. And what was particular about that event, which is relevant to this, is that the foundation for that event was students at Brattleboro High School. And these students came forward and learned about these men who are all on our memorial over here and made a presentation for each of them. That presentation meant the world to all veterans and to their families. One of the things we got as a result of that was a flag of Johnny Blake, who was a friend of mine. He graduated from St. Michael's in 1963, and it said, "Dedicated John Charles Blake, a citizen of Brattleboro, graduate of St. Michael's, a Navy corpsman, who gave his life for his country on March 21, 1970. And to all other Brattleboro men and women who died in defending liberty and the pursuit of happiness." We support the inquiry. to identify any individuals who served and who died and who are not presently counted among those on the monument. Particularly because this inquiry is made by our students who are carrying forward the work they did before and will do again. We would be honored to participate in the search to identify all of our men. We do not leave anyone behind. And we would be honored to dedicate the memorial when all have been identified. These are our brothers, and our heart aches for any of them who have not had the proper recognition. If in fact any of our African American brothers have not been recognized, make no mistake, veterans have been there, they are there now, and they will be in the front ranks of those dedicated to liberty and justice for all. And any veteran you know can tell you about having his arm around an African American man, and some of them can tell you about African American men who died in their arms. This is real, it's poignant, and it's vital. As individuals and as organizations, we're dedicated to that. We look forward to working with you in this most worthy cause. Chiming the words of your chair, which chime the words of one of our late presidents, with malice towards none, and with charity to all. That is over there on that obelisk. And as you know, the words of Abraham Lincoln. In that spirit, we dedicate ourselves to this mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you.
and Peter, I trust we will be working hand in hand with Post 5 and other community members that want to be involved in the upcoming project, you know,
Absolutely.
whatever that may turn out to be. Thank you. So I don't have anybody else who's chimed in on chat for public participation. And unless I have
Stephanie?
Oh gosh, I just saw that. I think it's because I'm slightly annoyed. Sorry, Stephanie, I'm annoyed with how it's set up here on the GoToMeeting. Sometimes, oh, you just wrote it. Good, okay. So Patrick, Stephanie Bonin will be chiming in now, if that's all right. I think with a drum roll. Here we go. Technology. Thanks, Stephanie.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to give a quick update of our. Sorry, my kids walkie-talkie. Hold on. Okay, sorry. I wanted a quick update of the one-to-one project that DBA has been doing. That's sort of like, Tim, what you talked about with the buddy check. So if that helps you visualize what we're doing. We were able to get a 12-week grant to implement this and have been our goal is to reach out to every single business in the district, which is 100 retail businesses. We're not counting the second story as of right now, and make sure that they have not missed any unturned rock in trying to figure out how to stay in our community if they want to stay in the community. So giving you an update, after about 3 weeks worth of work, we've reached out to 72 of the 100 businesses, and primarily by phone conversations. I'm working in tandem. I was able to bring on Amanda Whitman to support the work. And it's just, I thought I would pull out a couple interesting stats. Of those 66, 12 have been able to secure the federal economic funds through the PPP. So if that's not clear, I think that's a really terrible number. 12 out of the 66. 16 were able to secure the EIDL grant, which is anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000. And we have reached out a second, a third time, and also part of the program is pairing people who are talking about like things, such as I'm confused on whether this federal loan will be good for me. And we've been able to pair it with 2, 3, 4 other business owners who are having the same exact challenges. At the end, what we want to come out with is a much, much more cohesive, connected network downtown where everybody is a peer and everybody is standing by each other and making sure that we are surviving this. We have had incredible dialogue happening and communication via our private Facebook page. And in fact, since the beginning of March, we have almost doubled the amount of people that are a part of that private Facebook page. So that, again, is just a nod to working together and the strength in together. So it's been a highlight for me in watching people really sharing knowledge and helping each other out. But I do want to make sure that it's not missed that our community is not getting the relief that they need by any stretch of the imagination, and people are cheering for getting unemployment so that they can use that money to cover business expenses, not even cheering to cover their own personal, in some cases, even though both are very much needed. I also just wanted to touch on the idea of how we reopen, and I do feel like reopening is trickier or possibly trickier than closing was, and that was really tricky. And I would love for us as a community to have clear direction to our community members of what it means to what our expectations should be when we're out and about in public, so that when you go into a public park, it's the same expectation as when you go into Hannaford, and it's the same expectation as when you go into the library. And I think that is going to be really tough. What's coming from the state is not always clear. An example is the public health department just came out with, and I quote, we should make wearing cloth face coverings a habit to protect one another. Now that's very loose language. And as a store owner, it's going to be challenging to say to someone walking in, you must wear masks because that's my opinion. And it'd be so much easier if you were able to say, the governor has told us that we have to wear masks, or vice versa. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I definitely echo your sentiments, Tim and Brandy, and I think it's going to be super tricky. And if we could do anything as a community, it would be very helpful, I think, for all to have clear expectations.
Great. Thank you for the both the real world update and those comments, Stephanie. Brandy?
I guess I just want to make, and maybe this is a flip comment, but if we can have a sign that says no shoes, no shirt, no service, why can't we have a similar thing for masks? And I know that might be a flip comment, and this is a public meeting, and so I'm still going to state it out loud because I actually feel that way. Like, why, if a store can say you need to put your shirt on, why can't a store say you need to put your mask on? Maybe Peter, that's a question for you. I don't know. Maybe it's just a statement. It's just out there now.
I'll be happy to answer that question first. Reason I stepped away and took the phone call was it was Patrick telling me that he had lost his internet connection to the meeting. So he was concerned that we had lost the meeting. But since we're all still together, he's thinking he's going to be able to get back in. So he's working on that right now. In the meantime, we'll do the best we can. The answer to the question is unequivocally clear in the governor's most recent addendum, that the state isn't requiring everyone to have a mask, but is allowing anyone who is in control of a facility, so a proprietor at a store or the town being responsible for our town facilities, anybody who is in a position to have the public come into their space can require that every member of the public who comes into the space be wearing a mask.
And the town does
Carry on
so
a
as
Sunday
well.
for that. The town has implemented that people who are coming in, we'll go over the town's status in more completely in a few minutes, but one of the things we've done in opening the door just a crack to having people come back into the offices to receive services is that people only come in if they're wearing a mask. And we've actually acquired a supply of masks. So if someone arrives who needs to come in to receive a service from the town and doesn't have a mask with them, we will give them the mask and require that they wear it or they can't come in.
Thank you so much. And so Stephanie, I think what we need to do next is get all of our shop owners on board that all of the employees need to wear masks, and then we can put up signage that says other people need to. And so I was in 2 stores today. One had every single person that was working there wearing a mask, and the other had 2 of the 5 wearing a mask, and 3 of them kept coming really, really close to me, and I kept trying to like back away and letting them know I didn't need help. And so if the municipality is saying we need to wear a mask, I think that we can find a way to help shop owners enforce the same thing. That's just my opinion. That's not a directive, but
I think that would be wonderful. And I don't want to get lost in the weeds because there's so many points. It's not just about masks. It's about signing a credit card slip with a shared pen. There are so many different points. And so I do just want to make sure that I was clear in that I'm always a believer in one for all and all for one. And so whether it is stores or elsewhere, it is going to take a lot to win people's trust back and have that community feeling again. And so whatever we can do to all band together saying, you know, maybe it's 2 points, maybe it's only the masks, maybe it's 3 points, but all of us saying we're in this and you can expect the same thing all over Brattleboro, I think would be really quite wonderful, but hard, I know.
It is hard, and I think it's creating a culture of respect that everybody can live with. But I do want to make sure that everybody understands that the town of Brattleboro is not going to pass an edict that says people must wear masks in these situations. We don't have that power, and you could very easily argue that we should not have that power. But I know there's a difference of opinion about that, but I just told you my story about how I wasn't comfortable. So people also have to have their own personal, ways to react kindly to people who are just not respecting what they need with them. So, Stephanie, I don't envy you. You have your work cut out for you with everything that the merchants are. I'm assuming we're going to start a slow coming down from the governor's, what is it, the spigot, turning of the spigot, that it's going to be a challenge figuring all that out. And the town is here to assist where we can. Certainly, I shouldn't speak for the town, but I'll speak for the chair of the select board. Liz?
Yeah, I have a question for Stephanie. Stephanie, when shops open a quarter turn at a time, there'll still be online services and curbside services and so forth? Is that the plan?
Well, all of the discussion is all about how you're going to pivot as a business to survive. And so I think you'll see a lot of changes in how it's being done. And I don't think anyone quite has the answer yet. So this Saturday, you saw a lot of businesses experimenting with curbside and what that would look like for them. I don't think anyone can affirmatively tell you this is what it's going to look like in 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months. But I we're seeing, Whetstone and Echo open up more hours with curbside, and a lot of it has to do with the federal relief, because money comes in and you go up to pre-staffing levels. There's sort of, I think there's going to be a lot of fast-moving stuff like we've seen in all sectors during this pandemic, and I don't think the stores are any different. I think there's going to be a lot of fast-moving stuff like we've seen in a repeat.
Yeah, I think
It's good because it was hard to hear the first time.
I think there's a caller on the line that needs to mute themselves.
yeah, there might be. We'll see if Patrick can help us with that, if he has rejoined us or not. I don't see him.
He has rejoined us.
Okay. Maybe it's Patrick's fault.
I don't think so. I think
He
this moment.
can't defend himself, so I thought I'd throw him under the bus. So, well, thanks, Stephanie. And that was sort of, kind of bleeds into our COVID-19 update, public participation in COVID-19, but that's okay. And but Stephanie, did you have a chance to say everything you wanted to say for now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And so I think if no one has an objection, we will move into our official number 7 COVID-19 update. And I'll toss it over to Peter.
Thank you. Yeah, that absolutely was. There's good continuity between the comments time and the time, because it is so present in all of our aspects of our lives these days. And because my updates in the prior several select board meetings have been so thorough regarding, all the different aspects of town operations, I'm going to focus again, as I did last time, just on the things that have changed. Because we had a very substantial change yesterday. And so in the offices, the administrative services that are provided both within town government in support of other functions of town government, and those in town government who serve in office spaces providing services to the public. We have, as the governor said, opened the spigot a quarter turn. The doors to all of our public buildings are still locked. They will remain locked for weeks. Apropos to Stephanie's comment of a few minutes ago that, there's no way any of us can predict how quickly this can open up. And apropos to the comments all of you have made, going too quickly will be a really big mistake. So what we need to do is be patient and work with each other and protect each other and go very slowly in this process. And so what we have done that is different is we are staffing the offices with one person each time, one person each day. There have, throughout the period of time when the offices were completely closed and the majority of the work is being done from home, when almost all of the work of town employees was being done remotely, there were, throughout these past weeks, individuals who were going into the offices occasionally when it was necessary to do that to complete an essential task. And so we've been following these practices, the public health best practices of, staying out of the offices, having one person go in at a time. And on the very rare occasions when more than one needed to go in, they've been masked up, they've been wearing gloves, they've been social distancing. So for us, the office protocols were just getting sort of explicit and more formal about the same practices that have been followed for the last month or so. But from the community's point of view, what is entirely different this week compared to the past month is that if you need to come into the municipal center or to some other town facility for a piece of town business, whether you're giving or receiving, then you are able to do that. We ask that members of the public still conduct as much business as possible remotely, and we ask that for the same reason as we've all been discussing here for the last half hour to an hour, of the importance that we not have any more face-to-face interaction than necessary. It's good that we can start to resume that, but we need to resume it under very controlled circumstances and limit it as much as possible. And so the way that we're addressing that in our protocols for town government, all of which are set forth on the website in the town's update. They will, as of tomorrow, also be in the timeline update. So what we're requiring is that an individual who can't do a piece of business remotely and needs to come to our facilities be met at the door. Since the door is locked, they'll only be able to come in when they're met at the door by a town employee. The town employee will escort the customer to the appropriate office. They'll do the piece of business. While they're doing the piece of business, actually the entire time that the customer's in the building, they'll be masked. They will both use hand sanitizer while they're doing the piece of business. When the work is done, the customer will be escorted back to the door. When the customer has left, the employee will wipe all the surfaces that have been touched with a disinfectant. They'll wipe down all the surfaces that have been touched during the conduct of that business. And in any individual office, it'll continue to be as it has been when we were completely closed, that as much as possible, there will only be one person at a time in an office. There will sometimes be more than one. And when there is more than one person in an office, because it's necessary for the conduct of the work of that office, then the two employees will be practicing the same social distancing and protective measures with the sanitizing and the masking that is being done when we're helping a customer. So we're in this phase one of a slow reopen, and I can't possibly accurately predict how long that might last, but my expectation is it will be for weeks. Even if the stay home, stay safe order is lifted on May 15th, if we think back to what life was like in the middle of March before the stay home, stay safe order was announced and implemented, we were already in a situation where we were practicing, public health best practices, and we were already social distancing, and we already had limited access to many businesses and to town facilities. And so my expectation is that, May 15th is not a magic date for when things are going to free up more, but rather that's going to be a time when, in accordance with whatever is issued by the state, there is, some additional freedom of movement, but with all the same continuing constraints of how we're going to respect each other and protect each other with social distancing and masking and frequent hand washing and not touching our faces to the maximum degree that we can. That one's hard. But that will all stay in place, and it'll stay in place a long time. The next phase that we will ramp up within town government would be to bring in on a more regular basis greater numbers of employees. So instead of having almost everybody working from home and one at a time in the office, we'll be more fully staffed in the offices for the advantages that provides. But frankly, we're not in a hurry to do that because of the public health implications. We're not, and because during COVID, we've developed a lot of capacity for how we can work remotely and communicate with our, the rest of the team and with the public sufficiently to get the vast majority of town services provided. So, so that's where we are right now. That's how it's functioning now. I think we're going to stay in this status for a long time. We will announce to the public when we do go to that next phase where we have more staff coming in. But even at that point, my expectation is we will continue to have limited access to the buildings, that we will be meeting customers at the door and escorting them into the part of the building where they need to do business. And it will be a third phase out beyond that before we actually open up the doors and people can come freely in and out of the municipal center. And I look forward to that day, but I can't possibly predict how soon that might be. One other thing I didn't say, but probably should say, I didn't say it because their status hasn't changed, but I want to make clear to the community that, as has been true throughout the emergency time, throughout the more closed time of COVID, emergency services are continuing to be provided by the police department and the fire department. There are special protocols in place related to the public health protections for the employees and the people being served. But those services are continuous and have been continuous. Our field services ramped way down, but never stopped for those who provide the essential services of the Department of Public Works, the parks maintenance, and the facilities maintenance teams of the town government. And they are now ramping back up, and they have protocols that they are to follow that are similar to what I've described for the office. situation in terms of wearing masks and washing hands frequently, using hand sanitizer frequently when there's not soap and water available, and otherwise, cleaning all the equipment before and after uses, so that, again, as much as possible, we are protecting not just individuals protecting themselves, but individuals protecting their teammates and the broader community.
Thank you, Peter. I had a couple of thumbs up, really quick follow-up questions concerning that. I had a chance to speak a little bit to Star at the library. As people know, they've started a procedure of checking out and returning, and a lot of people are super excited about that. So I'm feeling pretty good that her department is feeling good about it. But do you want to just let us know, is there a different levels of comfort with the new protocols at the municipal center? Is that something that you encountered, and is that going okay? People being fairly comfortable?
Yeah, we're humans, and so there's varying levels of comfort. Some people are feeling bolder and maybe a little more annoyed by the rigorous procedures that we're asking everyone to follow. Some people are concerned that maybe this isn't enough. Can there be more? Should there be more? And we're continuing to talk about those things, explore that, learn from others who are taking additional protective measures. We do have, so that the public will be aware of this, expect it when you come back in, we have on order, but only in one office so far actually have installed the plexiglass barriers that you see at the grocery stores and other places now really commonly. That's going to be standard around the town offices as soon as the additional ones arrive, which we expect to be shortly. So there are some additional things that we're moving towards doing, even above and beyond the masking and the hand washing and the sanitizer and the wiping down of the surfaces. But I'd say everybody was really helpful and constructive to the degree that there were concerns. Folks spoke up about those. We had a chance to work through them and identify actions that might be able to be taken to mitigate those concerns. And everybody received training. This was something actually that was required by the governor's order, but where we decided to take an additional step and go beyond it because we were concerned that while it is a really good thing that every employee of any organization anywhere in the state was required to take the basic VOSHA training, the Vermont Occupational Safety and Health Administration training of best practices, that was sort of a very standardized, very brief exposure to the best practices. And we wanted to make sure that town employees were exposed to that, were able to learn from that, but also have it be more interactive with an opportunity to follow up with us about our procedures. So what we did was had Captain Chuck here from the fire department actually recorded a session with the department heads and me where he did a training that was about 45 minutes long instead of 10 minutes long that incorporated all the things that were required by the state, but went much deeper into things that are particular to the town, either to our community or to our facilities or to our procedures. And so it was a really helpful session. He also said probably 25 times, don't touch your face. And it was actually kind of fun. There was some lightness to it to help people realize, hey, we're going to get through this, kind of keep spirits up even as we were learning important things. And so the hand washing and the don't touch your face, he reiterated over and over again and walked us through the various other aspects of how we can be as safe as possible together as we ramp slowly back up to activity. I'm glad you mentioned the library. I'm sorry I left that out. So the library and the recreation department are a little different in this, just as they are in daily functioning of the town. They have longer hours. They're not offices per se. They're places where the community gathers and where we have cultural enrichment. And so that has continued to be true in both areas, online to the maximum degree that we can. And it is now true again in the library services for the curbside service for pickup when people are borrowing, and for returning goods to borrowed materials to the municipal center drop box that's there in the parking lot, the big blue metal box. So the library has been able to, sort of ramp back up that bit. And again, that reflects sort of where we were right before the stay home, stay safe order was implemented. In the recreation department, unfortunately, the types of activities that are offered are so interactive, and they're usually groups gathering, that we're not able to do that just yet. But the reminder we have provided to the community in our daily updates is that as soon as it's safe for those kinds of things to resume, the recreation department will be offering programs again, and that we'll be announcing that to the community. That's likely weeks away at this point.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Shout out. I utilized the curbside pickup for the library yesterday, and it was super easy. So great.
And can I just clarify something? You mentioned the big blue box for returns. Are they also taking returns through the regular slot through the front?
No, we're asking everyone to bring it to the big blue box because of the need to sanitize the materials as they come back into circulation. We want there to be a concentrated single location where they're returning things.
And that's in the parking lot in the back.
That's correct. It's just as you come in from Grove Street into the Municipal Center parking lot, it's immediately on your left.
Yeah, and you can drive right up to it, right? So
yep.
It can be part of your errands.
Yes, and actually while we're in the Municipal Center parking lot, so to speak, we've also installed a lockbox. This is a smaller black metal box that is attached to the wooden light pole that is the easternmost. So there's 2 solar lights for that parking lot that stand on very large wooden posts. And the easternmost one, the one that is not right outside the back door to the Municipal Center, but is nearest to it within the parking lot, has now attached to it a black lockbox where we are requesting that people, if you haven't mailed in your tax payment or utility payments, or haven't paid online, or haven't paid through your bank, all of which are preferred methods of paying. So it's electronic or it's mailed. If you're going to bring one to the Municipal Center, we ask you to drop it in the box rather than come inside to the treasurer's office, for the same obvious reason of everything we've been discussing this evening. It's just safer for the folks who are paying their bills and safer for the staff who are receiving them and processing them.
And the building's locked anyway.
And the building is locked anyway, right? So what we're saying is if you have an issue you need to address, if you have a question about your bill or some other circumstance where you need to interact with the treasurer's office staff, then that's more like what's going on with the rest of the departments. And it may, but probably doesn't require being face-to-face. It's probably something that can be done by email or by phone. And so please use those electronic means of communicating as much as possible. But if there is something that really requires that a treasurer's office employee be interacting with a member of the public at a counter, then the same procedures will apply in terms of meeting someone at the door and bringing them inside. But for the payment of the quarterly tax bills and utility bills, we're asking that it be done either electronically or in the parking lot.
Thank you, Peter. Daniel?
Just a quick question about that. If somebody were to call the treasurer's office and want to come in and make their payment, would they be told, no, you cannot do that?
They will be told, please put it in an envelope and drop it in the box in the back.
Yes, good.
You know how
Could I just ask a second question about that?
Public service, right? It's a hard habit to break, to not want to accommodate somebody who's trying to do a piece of business for the town. And yet, counter to all our natural instincts, we're trying to push people away who don't have to be inside the building. And so the really obvious one for us right now is tax bills and utility bills, because this is the time of the quarter when there would normally be a very large number of people coming into the building only for a few minutes and only to do a task that they can do electronically or in the parking lot. And so we're firmly but politely asking that they do that.
Okay, good. With the payments online, am I right in thinking that there's an additional fee for those payments?
There's an additional fee if you pay by credit card. There's a service charge that's part of the credit card processing that the town, the service that the town purchases. So the credit card processor charges that fee. But if you do a payment from your bank, which can be done either as setting it up as a one-time, it's getting to be pretty late in this process now for setting it up as a one-time payment, because that usually takes a week or so for the bank to set it up with you and then actually make the payment to the town. But it can be done that way. Or we also allow the direct debit ongoing, so that every quarter on the deadline date. So in terms of maintaining the float in your account and so on, a lot of people come in that last day or two with their checks. And you can accomplish that without having to remember it if your financial circumstances are such and your banking arrangement is such that you'd rather just set it up for a automatic withdrawal. So this cycle, May 15th, is the deadline day. It's a Friday, so that's actually, sometimes it gets adjusted a little bit if it falls on a weekend, but this time around, it's actually May 15th at 5 o'clock that the payments have to be made. And on May 15th, everybody who is set up for that direct debit from their bank, that's going to come through into our system.
Thank you,
And
Peter.
if you put it in the box, you don't even need a stamp.
That's correct.
That's
you can drop it in
true.
the box without a stamp. It's just like a mailbox, except it's the black box for tax payments and utility payments.
Right.
I don't know why, but this is difficult for me. I always pay my utility bill at the counter, and that's just what I do. So I feel the pain of everyone not wanting to do that. I don't know why. It just feels like that's what I do.
Maybe what people could do is when they drop their payment in the box, they could also include a little note to town staff saying hi, and that would be nice.
A little mint.
Yeah.
No, bad idea for the summertime. Well, speaking of payments, I think it's a great segue into a little financial update from Peter. Thank you.
So this was a written update for the select board. It was in the backup materials. Those who are with us this evening may have seen it there. For those who haven't, I just want to be really, really clear that everything that comes after this sentence comes with a really large asterisk attached to it. What we have done is projected where we think we're going to end the fiscal year on June 30th. And actually after June 30th, but when all the final entries are made. There are, particularly on the revenue side, there are things that became payment obligations to people by June 30th, so they go on to this fiscal year as receivables, but we don't necessarily receive them until July or even August. And so, for instance, a really good example of that is the revenues in the solid waste operation. In the monthly report, you're used to hearing us say, and we're a month behind and adding those to the records, because that's how that works, right? There's a lot of revenue that's coming from the bag sales that is based on the sales out across all the retail outlets. When the month ends, they report their results, and then there's a process by which that's aggregated and the town actually receives the revenue from the bag provider for the bags that have been sold. And so there will be a final tally of revenues that might be as late as the middle or latter part of August. But with that, probably too deep dive into the weeds, we have estimated the additional expenditures we expect to incur between now and June 30th. Some things we know we will incur. Other things we're trying to limit as much as possible, but we can't avoid every expense. So there will be some other expenses that we incur. And we think that in total, we will end the fiscal year a little less than $500,000 below the appropriated expenditures level. So where we expected to spend a certain amount of money, up around $18 million, we expect to come in about $500,000 under that. Likewise, it's a balanced budget. So there's about $18 million worth of revenues, the lion's share of that being property taxes, about 82% of that total, but there are quite a number of other sources of revenue that the town has as well. And we've estimated each one of those. And we also believe, just coincidentally, this was not anything we set out for a particular outcome. We tried objectively to look at the expenditures and objectively to look at the revenues. And when we completed that, we landed in a place where we also think the revenues are going to come in about $500,000 under the budgeted amount. There are a couple of assumptions that are hugely important that I'll go into in a minute about why we are uncomfortable about the margin of error that's involved in this first estimate, and why we all need to really be cautious about drawing conclusions from it. But in addition to the estimates, or the assumptions rather, there's also just the fact that there are so many different pieces to this. Not as much on the revenue side. On the revenue side, what we have is more uncertainty. On the expenditure side, we have a greater degree of certainty in most of the line items, but we have so many different line items, dozens and dozens, actually hundreds of them, that there's some rounding involved each time, and then you sort of apply all of that over the large, of the full exercise, and it leaves us anxious that decisions might be made about this. But if this first estimate turns out to be accurate, and we will update it as we go to the May 19th meeting and the June 2nd meeting, and on every meeting after that until it's no longer necessary to do it every meeting, and we go back to something that feels more normal with a monthly rhythm of updates. But if this ends up being accurate, what it means is that we're going to end the year without a surplus or a deficit, or a tiny surplus or a tiny deficit, budget to budget. The use of fund balance in this budget year will be what we expected it to be, which is about $330,000. So the difficulty here is, since we have no margin there, it's not like we have made an estimate and we say, so we've got a couple $100,000 of buffer between where we think we're going to end and what would cause us to fall into deficit, right? Instead, where we believe we're going to end is right on the zero line. And so anything that turns out worse than we expect, whether that's more expense or more likely less revenue, is going to be a situation that we might end up the year in deficit, where we have to draw more fund balance than we had planned to for this year. That's legal and proper, particularly under emergency circumstances like this. It'll require a ratifying action of representative town meeting when we're able to hold one, but it's obviously a really undesirable outcome. And so we'll do everything we can to avoid that, but there's going to be some parts of this that are beyond our control. And that's a good segue for me to talk about the assumptions, unless any of you want me to pause and talk about something that isn't part of those assumptions. It's part of the overall effort.
No, go right ahead. I think everyone's nodding.
So the assumptions, which I know you're all well aware of, and I've been able to have one-on-one conversations with several of you about these details, but I want to make sure that I touch on each one for the benefit of the public. We are expecting a normal rate of collection of property taxes. So normal doesn't mean 100%, because even in a regular year, there's usually a few property taxpayers who aren't able to pay on time for whatever their personal reasons are. The lion's share of those end up paying late rather than seeking relief. But there is a mechanism for folks to seek relief if they are simply unable to pay, rather than in a situation where they need to pay late. And that's called the tax abatement process. And folks can apply and then provide information to the town, and then that information is reviewed by the Board of Abatement, which is a group of people that includes the Select Board, but also includes justices of the peace and others. I'm not sure of the full, who's fully, what the full description is of the folks that are eligible, but it's about 20 or 30 folks who are able to be on the Board of Abatement. And on any given evening, we have a quorum of them hear the matters that are, the appeals that have been filed. And in most years, those are few and pretty straightforward. We don't really know what to expect this year. We know there's been a lot of talk about it may be very hard for some people to pay their taxes. We also know that there have been, particularly for employees, we heard from Stephanie earlier that it's not going so well in terms of business relief, and there's been a lot about that in the news as well. But for employees, the unemployment insurance seems to it started to kick in. It's catching up to people who had applied and maybe had to wait a little while before it kicked in. That's not to say it's perfect. It's not to say that every household is had a positive experience with it, but it is to say, at least from what we know, both from the experience with town employees and the experience with, what we've seen in the news, that even for some self-employed folks, through the news we've seen this, and then through just the general overall impact, it does seem as though unemployment insurance is starting to catch up. And so we just don't know what the ability to pay is. There's also, all the larger commercial properties are mostly owned by corporations. That's not entirely true. There are individuals who own a few of them, but it is mostly true. And then there's just, other ways in which escrow companies, for instance, pay on behalf of owners for about 25% of the taxes. And we've already seen significant amounts of escrow money come in. And there's some more that we know will come in because it's part of that escrow process. It's actually paid by escrow agents rather than by individuals. So the sum total of this is, I think it would be reasonable to expect that we might end up a little below the normal collection rate of 98.75, but we don't have any way to predict accurately how much below. And every percent that we fall short of that is worth $150,000 in the town's budget, in the financial analysis that we're discussing here. So it's got a huge impact. A small difference has a huge impact in the final outcome of this. And we won't really have a better handle on this until a few weeks from now, when May 15th has come and gone and we see whether or not we're at or about 98%, and whether the character of the late accounts looks consistent with a normal year. What we do know is, at this point in the process, when we've got about 10 days to go, we are smack on exactly where we would expect to be, both in terms of the types of payments that have been coming in and the timing of those payments and the amounts of those payments. And so where we stand as of today is, in total collections for the year, we're at 85%. And in collections for the quarter, we're at 45%. And with about 10 days to go in the final quarter of the year before the final deadline, that's right about on normal. We have years worth of data that goes day by day through these cycles. And the Treasurer's Office has done some analysis to look at where are we in this moment versus a year ago or 2 or 3. And it's a really consistent rate of payment over the years. And we're on that, if we were to graph it, we're on the line, having the money come in about as we normally expect it will. So that bodes well. But if you think about it, to the degree that we might end up short, we're most likely, and I'm getting a message. I'm going to turn off my camera. Sorry about that. I was just getting a message that my internet is slowing down and I didn't want to lose the connection with y'all. So it's weird for me now to be talking to the blank screen. But let me tell you that the concern that we have about this one most important category of revenue is that the fact that a small undercollection results in a large dollar amount, and that we really can't know until the last minute, that people who find themselves unable to pay, who might be still at this moment trying to find a way, are going to be accounts that we learn about at the very last minute, right as the deadline approaches. So on May 19th, 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have a lot more to say about that. The 4 other items I'll speak in less detail about because they're more straightforward than the property tax situation, but we are not expecting this one. Next one is a conservative estimate. It is protective of the variations that might occur when we get to the finish line. We're not expecting to receive any more revenue from the rooms and meals tax. And the reason for that is it's obvious that lodging services and restaurant services have slowed, lodging almost to nothing, restaurants severely below any kind of normal business because of just offering curbside and some of them not able to function at all. And so as a result of that, we do expect to make some small collections, but we don't have any way of knowing what the magnitude of that might be. And we felt that it was most prudent to just assume that there would be nothing for the third quarter we're about to receive the third quarter payments. They would come by mid-May for both the local option rooms and meals and the local option sales tax. And so our analysis assumed that we would get no additional revenues from rooms and meals. It did assume that we would get additional revenues from the sales tax. I'm going to kick my camera back on and see if that works. And it isn't showing me you, but it says it's showing you me. So hopefully that's true.
There you
Okay.
are.
Yeah, here you are.
Okay. So the what we assumed for sales tax was different, and it's different for a couple of different reasons. One is that there is still a fair amount of commerce being conducted by non-lodging, non-restaurant establishments that are providing essential services to the community. So there's some sales tax that's likely to be generated by those storefronts. And then there's the significant impact of the online sales. So that our understanding from things we've read is that online sales have actually increased during this time because of everybody being at home and not able to go out to acquire some things that they need. And so it's possible that the greater than expected rate of collection that we experienced for the first 2 quarters of this year in the local option sales tax might continue, but we did so well compared to our expectations that we didn't think it was prudent to forecast that that rate of collection would continue. What we instead decided to do was expect that those 2 great quarters in the beginning would offset whatever shortages we might have in quarter 3 and quarter 4. And so for the purposes of this exercise, we estimate that we'll end up right on the projected collection amount for the year, which means that the collection rate for the second half of the year would only be 44% of what it was for the first half of the year. We think that's a safe bet. And so that, just like the 0 expectation on the rooms and meals, we feel as though these 2 items are a bit of a hedge against the great uncertainty and magnitude of the property tax part of this and the likelihood that we're going to come up a little short there. The last 2 items are going to be pure policy questions. The select board will decide whether we incur these costs or whether we don't. But I flag them just as FYI because they are matters that we've had some discussion about in one of them for the last few months and then the other one for the last few weeks. If we were to make a payment into whether it's cow power or carbon offsets or some other kind of payment that is in demonstration of the town's commitment to stepping lighter on the planet and behaving in a more carbon neutral manner. If we do that, our assumption for this exercise has been that we won't do that in this fiscal year because of the fiscal stress that we're in, because of the uncertainty and because of the shortfall that we know we're going to have related to revenues. And so our expectation is that we won't make such a payment. If you do decide to make such a payment, you should expect that that might be a tipping point to where that payment would be coming from the unassigned fund balance, and it would, for the year, tip us into a deficit outcome. And likewise, if there is any general fund relief or recovery payments authorized by the select board to individuals or organizations in the community, that would be above and beyond anything that is estimated. We've estimated 0 for anything like that. Those would all be unbudgeted expenses. And so we're anticipating that there won't be any such expenses. If you decide that there need to be, then those would be, additional costs that would not have an offsetting revenue. And we expect that that would also tip the town into a deficit condition. I should note for the record something I know the select board is well aware of, but we are in communication with other communities and with the state of Vermont around a coordinated statewide program that would provide business relief through the program income funds that are operated by a number of different municipalities and other organizations around the state. The town, if we participate in that program, would be providing direct payments in the form of either grants or loans or a combination of them to businesses but it would come from the program income, which, as we've said many times before, is federal money that comes through the state and doesn't get intermixed with local tax money. So the comment I make about the potential for direct payments tipping us into deficit is specific to a town-initiated program. If there ever was a town-initiated program here in the coming weeks to spend from the general fund, then that is the caveat related to these 5 assumptions. I still don't see you, but I'm done, and I'll listen to you if somebody has a question.
Oh, we see and hear you. So thank you for that update. Ian had a hand up for a question.
Yeah, Peter, could you speak a little bit more to the abatement process in light of the current situation? I think it may be helpful for people to understand it a little bit more than I think a lot of people are aware of currently.
Sure. Yeah, I can appreciate that. It's, again, as I mentioned, not a heavily used option for taxpayers in a normal year, and might get more activity this year. And for details about how someone would access that and how that process works, I think it's best that we turn to Hillary Francis, the town clerk, who administers that process for the town.
Yeah, and while we wait for Hillary, I'll just say that info is available on the town website. It's pretty well organized, but go ahead, Hillary. You were faster than I thought you would be.
Oh, muted.
Oh, just hit your mute there if you find it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. So thank you for that, Tim. Yes, everything is on the website, including the abatement application form, as well as sort of a layout of the process. But I have it in front of me and I can just walk everybody through that if that's okay. So basically the process, it's a statutory process for relieving taxpayers from the burden of paying property taxes, water charges, sewer charges, interest and or collection fees when the law authorizes abatement, when the board in its discretion agrees that the request is reasonable and proper. So the statute sort of lays out 5 different reasons why we would be allowed as the Board of Abatement to grant an abatement, and we can't grant it outside of those reasons. So what it says is taxes or charges of persons who have died insolvent, taxes or charges of persons who have moved from the state. The third one, which I'm about to mention, is the one that would likely be the reason why people would state for COVID-related reasons, and that's taxes or charges of persons who are unable to pay their taxes or charges, interest, and collection fees. The fourth is taxes where there's a manifest error or a mistake of the listers. And the last one is taxes or charges upon real or personal property lost or destroyed during the tax year. So those are the only reasons why we're allowed as the board to grant an abatement. The process is somebody would submit an application. The board, as Peter mentioned, is required to have a quorum, which is 13 people. So the board is made up of the select board, the town clerk, the town treasurer, and the listers. And I think that's, and the justice of the peace. So we need a minimum of 13 people to have a quorum to vote. And we usually hold those hearings twice a year. And it's based on when we get requests. In preparing your case before the board, we recommend that people should remember that the person who's requesting the abatement carries the burden of providing that an abatement is necessary in their case. So a lot of people submit written evidence or other witnesses to support their case. In a situation where somebody is requesting an abatement based on inability to pay, oftentimes they will submit a balance sheet and provide all of their assets as well as expenses. The board is really looking for a deep dive into that information to determine whether or not they had the assets to pay or not, and what that looks like. Under normal circumstances, sometimes as we get to the end of the year, towards that May 15th payment, choosing not to pay and accruing penalties and interest while waiting for your hearing could potentially make your situation worse if the board decides not to grant you that abatement. So by not paying, you're accruing interest and penalties, and then if it doesn't get granted, then you accrue that. So that's just something to keep in mind under normal circumstances. Peter can probably speak to any changes that might be the case here. But that's just sort of a layout of the process, what it looks like. And again, all of the information is on our website under the town clerk section under abatements. And it lays it out very clearly.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Brandy?
Thank you, Hillary, because I'm glad that you explained the normal process, because I think in any year that's normal, people generally don't understand the abatement process and what that might look like. And so it's good that we have an opportunity to explain that. Peter, my question for you as town manager or as somebody who may have information from the state is there anything in place due to COVID-19 that can lessen people's stress and extra work for providing these deep dives when so many people are struggling? I want people's abatement hearings to not become anomalies, but to become understood. That we understand that people are going to have these, and that we understand that this is not a normal year, which I'm really glad Hillary highlighted, because I still think people are confused about the abatement process in any year. But for this year, have there been some changes that can lessen people's stress, mental health, and anxiety strain for this process?
I'm going to talk about actually the legislation that's been passed as opposed to the purpose of it, because I don't know that I'm really in a position to speak to the legislature's intent as to the, on that continuum between sort of the practical financial aspects of it and the emotional stress related aspects of it. What I can say is the legislature has already adopted, and the governor has signed, legislation that provides some flexibility to municipalities related to deadlines and penalties and interest. So I'll speak to that in a minute. There are some implications to how they adopted it that make it difficult for municipalities. And it's different from what municipalities had urged the legislature to adopt in the process by which that bill was being considered. I'll speak to that in a second. So there is some global relief that you might be able to provide. But your question really goes more to the process by which abatement is granted. And my answer to that would be no, I'm not aware of any legislation that has changed the statutory requirements for what makes somebody eligible to receive an abatement. So for folks who don't pay in the first instance and don't travel under some global relief that you as a select board might decide to grant in the second instance, their method of obtaining relief is going to be the abatement process. And I'm not aware of anything that has changed how the abatement process will function for applicants this year as compared to a normal year. If it's okay with the board, I'd like to go back and talk about what the legislature did approve and why it's, I think, deficient in terms of being a real tool to use.
Well, I think that would be good information.
What municipalities are allowed to do at the discretion of the select board is extend the deadline for when the payments are due, or waive the penalties and interest for those who don't pay on time. there are some pros and cons you'd need to weigh even before doing that. And, you know, from a relieving stress on people who are dealing with some of the harder aspects of this, who are more households that are more impacted by COVID financially than others, that may seem like a no-brainer. Extend that deadline or waive those penalties. There are some implications to that, even just in, you know, the decision-making process that you should weigh. And I don't think we necessarily need to take that deeper dive now. I'm willing to if that's where you want to go. But my point is just that there's a process you should go through, like any policy decision, where you think about what benefits this provides and then what the negative impacts might be and make an informed decision. The problem with the way that came down is the Vermont League of Cities and Towns and many of our individual municipalities asked the legislature to, including Brattleboro, by the way, we were among the chorus of voices supporting this. We said, look, as you look to provide this flexibility to municipalities, municipalities also need protection, because we have an obligation under the state statutes, whether or not we have collected local taxes for education. The state statute requires us to pay 100% of the bill for the education property taxes. Education property taxes are more than half of the property taxes we collect in town.
That's right.
Our municipal property taxes are less than half. So if we proceed with a system that is very forgiving, that pushes that deadline way out, or waives all the penalties and makes it easy for people to say, well, I'll pay later instead of now because I'm not going to incur any additional cost, then we're going to under-collect substantially to that 98.75% marker. And as you know, every 1% of that is $150,000. And then what we're going to be is in a position where the town is still going to owe the full payment to the state for the education property taxes, even though we under-collected from our taxpayers. And so it puts towns in a very, very difficult position to use the tool the state provided, because we're likely to have to borrow. And then there's an impact, you know, a longer term impact for every taxpayer, for all aspects of town government, for, you know, a drag on what we can afford to do in providing the basic services to the community by having to pay back interest for the money we borrowed to keep the state whole for the education property tax in order to provide the relief to the limited number of households who would benefit from that. So I totally get why, you know, we need to keep looking at whether or not some aspect of this might work, and why the select board would want to explore that. The way that it has been adopted so far doesn't provide us a very viable way forward.
Thank you, Peter. Do you have so you said that we would be responsible for the school taxes. We're not school administrators or directors or board of directors, but do you have an estimate, a guesstimate, a ballpark of what that looks like financially for this fiscal year? If you,
I don't have that at hand. I can have that for May 19th, and I can provide it to you in the meantime.
Yes. It would be important.
It would be this fiscal year and next fiscal year. That the provisions of the bill say that for the remainder of FY20, so basically in our case, the fourth quarter payments, and then for what would be in our case, the first 2 quarterly payments for FY21, the flexibility that the special act allows would apply to calendar year 2020. Once we get into January of 2021, we go back to all the normal rules. So if you were to do this, it would potentially, depending on what your decision was, affect this quarterly process that we're in right now for May 15th deadline, but also the August 15th and the November 15th would be in play if you decided. I need to do some research to be able to bring you reliable information about what the magnitude of that payment looks like. The one thing I would say, I think I left this out, and I know it's a picky detail, but I think it's an important picky detail. When we as municipalities were asking the legislature to include a provision that would protect us against this very situation, to make it a real tool you could consider using, where the town might be willing to collect less taxes for a period of time in order to let people ride through this less precariously, without having to borrow the money to pay the state. what was proposed by the municipalities wasn't just, make it easier for us. What was proposed by the municipalities was that the state, because the state of Vermont is receiving COVID-related aid from the federal government for a variety of different purposes, and because the state of Vermont has greater financial wherewithal than any particular municipality, we asked that they, during this limited period of time when this flexibility would be provided to municipalities, that the state provide the backstop on the education property tax, that they keep the education fund whole at the state level until tax payments caught up with it. And
Okay.
that ended up on the cutting room floor in the legislative process. So again, I think it's going to make it very difficult for most municipalities to use the tool, but we'll be happy to bring you an analysis of what our real numbers look like.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know that I need a full analysis, but what I want to do and what you just did, and if we had one step further from you, just as like financial clarification, what my goal is I frankly, because we're just being frank these days, want to explain to our community why we actually can't do things financially and how our hands have been tied and what those numbers look like. And so I don't need like this huge, financial write-up, but I'd love to say like, hey, this is how much money Brattleboro is going to owe for the school for this year, whether or not taxpayers pay money, and this is where our hands are tied. Because I think people need to hear that kind of information when they're talking to us and emailing us about why we can't do more.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Brandy. Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds reasonable. I also want to just throw out that it's a really problematic situation to consider any kind of blanket move in these stressful times, because those blanket moves or blanket abatements would forgive people who absolutely can afford to pay their taxes, as well as those who can't afford to pay their taxes. And I'm very much opposed to doing that, because that opens up just all kinds of, allowances for people who should and will be paying their taxes. And as we've seen from Peter's report, they are, and they're so far, our taxes are on time. But we should be relying on a very well-designed and robust abatement process, in my opinion. So I didn't mean to make a little speech there. Did anybody want to? Oh, Peter.
Well, I see some green lights on the select board's boxes. So if select board members want to comment in that part of the conversation, I want to wait. But then I've got one more thing that I should add about the legislative action to deal with these unique circumstances.
Okay, I don't see any pressing hands or anything like that. So go ahead, Peter, and then I have one more thing.
So this one comes with a particular personal shout out that we don't normally do. We appreciate the work that our legislators do on behalf of the community individually and collectively. But it wouldn't be right not to say thank you to Emily Kornheiser for noticing that something we thought was in that original bill, that larger bill that dealt with a lot of different municipal taxation issues. It was, when it came out of the Senate committee, and thanks to Jeanette White, who's the chair of the Senate Government Operations Committee, for making sure that in her committee it got dealt with in a way that was going to be helpful to us. But then later on in the process, it dropped out of the Senate's bill. So what it is the relief that Brattleboro particularly needs, and a few other communities for other unusual circumstances, because we don't have an adopted budget yet. So the legislators all have gotten an education and representative town meeting over the last few weeks, because they really were scratching their heads when we first were asking for why we needed the ability to issue tax bills after July 1st to be paid in August, even if we hadn't been able to have a town meeting by then. And they didn't get it at first, but we've had good conversations around that. There's been a lot of good communication within the two committee levels at the Senate Government Operations and House Government Operations. And now there appears to be a solution. Literally, we're on the eve of it. We expect this to get passed by the House tomorrow. But in the meantime, it dropped out of the Senate bill. So when the bill that was doing all this other municipal taxation adjustment just for these special times went over from the Senate to the House, it didn't have in it the provision we needed to allow us to issue those first quarter tax bills for FY21. Emily noticed that and called me and said, wait a minute, I don't see it here in the bill. Don't you need XYZ? And I said, yeah, we do need that. And she said, well, it's not here. And then she went and she talked to people in the legislature and the folks who draft bills for the legislature, the legislative counsel's office, the attorneys who assist the legislators. And the sum total of that effort was a standalone bill that Emily proposed in the House that has been approved by the House Government Operations Committee that is going to the full House tomorrow. And then the expectation is it'll get easily adopted there. And then it'll go over to the Senate where the expectation is it'll get easily adopted there. And what it will say is any place that has not yet had a town meeting, any municipality in Vermont that has not yet had its annual town meeting in 2020 will be allowed to have its select board adopt a budget and issue and approve a tax rate so that we can move into July and not have to shut down government. The expectation, of course, is that we're going to have a representative town meeting. We hope maybe still to have it sometime in June, but I think the likelihood of that is getting to be less and less. So we need this protection so that you can authorize what's necessary for us to keep government functioning. But it's possible that in the second half of the summer, we'd be able to have a representative town meeting with everybody together, whether that's outdoors or indoors or by whatever other means we need to do it. And so we will if we can. As a very last resort, if we have to, in order to be able to have a town meeting this year, we'll do it this way, but with obvious difficulties, even sometimes just for us, and then, do that with 150 voting members, and it's a problem. So we're still, for representative town meeting, in the same place that we have been, needing to take this patiently, looking for the opportunity to prudently and legally warn one and hold one. But in the meantime, we should get the stopgap we need by the legislative action tomorrow and then next week.
Great, thank you, Peter. Yeah, and to the viewers, forgive us for that little bit of a deep dive, but that's absolutely one of those stories that happened in the background and hopefully is going to come out successfully and really wouldn't have happened without Emily's quick eye and quick action. So we appreciate that. Yay. And so Liz, did you have something to add? Or?
I just wanted to thank Emily again.
Yeah, much appreciated.
Thank you, Emily.
On a just a little bit of housekeeping, this has been a lot of talk about COVID-19, and we've had public participation. One thing I neglected to do was to sort of open up the phone lines, as the radio people used to say. I did see that we had a couple callers. I did at one point know who one of them was, but I think I still do. So Patrick, one of them is identified as Kate O'Connor, would like to say something, I think. And if I forget how this works, because we haven't done the phone line thing. I think if Kate, if you could take yourself off mute if you wanted to ask a question or make a comment about just COVID-19 in downtown.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes. Are you calling from the late 80s? Why?
Oh,
why
exciting. I appreciate you letting me say a few words. I tried to get in earlier, but GoToMeeting is not my friend. I just want to comment just a quick second on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, because I don't want the meeting to go by with everyone under the impression that all businesses are closed in Brattleboro, because that's the furthest from true. Businesses aren't, working at the same level or in the same way that they've been doing it, but a lot of them are out there safely doing business. And one of the messages that we've been putting out through the Chamber is from the comfort of your home or curbside from your car, Brattleboro is open for business. And I think it's really important now that we support the businesses that are open now, and that we can support the ones as they roll out more and more. And as the town manager said, online sales are up. I think it's really important that the online sales are online Brattleboro business sales. Don't make your first stop Amazon. Make your first stop a Brattleboro business. So I just wanted to get that message out and have everybody remember, shop local, support local. You can buy everything pretty much. If you want shoes, you want maple syrup, if you want beer and you want wine, whatever you want, you can buy it in Brattleboro. You may buy it online and you may buy it on the curb, but you can get it. So that's the message I want people to remember. It'll help us all in the long run. So thanks for letting me say a few words, and it's fun watching you.
Probably more fun for you than it is for us.
Yeah.
I just want to say hi, Kate. It was good seeing you walk by on Green Street from a good social distance today, and it's good to hear your voice tonight. And yeah, I do a lot of curbside and takeout and delivery and everything from so many Brattleboro businesses, and even more opened up this weekend, and you can absolutely find what you need.
Yes, thank you for the reminder, Kate.
Thank you.
And I think if I'm interpreting this right, like when Kate was talking, she appears in two places, and I think she's the other caller as well somehow. But if there's another caller on the line, would you go ahead and take yourself off mute? I guess that's the only way to find out for sure. Going once, going twice. Okay. So I think that's it. Does any other board members have a comment or question for Peter before we move on? No? Okay. So I think the next thing is a couple of three very important pieces of business with water and sewer commissioners. Do I have a motion to become water and sewer commissioners?
So moved.
Thank you, Brandy. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Here we go. Our first on the agenda is a very big and something that we've been knowing was coming down the pike for quite a while, and we're all sort of scared of talking about it, but we're going to be talking about it bravely here right now. The water treatment plant replacement project. I'm going to turn it over to Peter to kick us off, I guess.
Thank you. I'm happy to dive in, but I want to just pause long enough to see whether, because this discussion is likely to take a while. It is a significant project. It's an expensive project. It's an essential project for the safety of our water system. And so I expect we may talk about it for certainly at least a half an hour, probably more like an hour. And so I want to pause long enough to see if y'all want to have a break so people can run to the restroom and then come back and have this discussion.
What do people feel?
I see some of the members thinking that might be
already done this.
Well, my inclination would be to sort of take turns taking breaks. Daniel's going to take turns. No, I don't know. I mean, is that bad to do? I hate dead air, as they call it on radio.
Don't be afraid of dead air.
No.
I'm going to take this opportunity for a break rather than my chair is also very uncomfortable. I need to get a better one.
Okay. I just saw Steve pop up too, so I feel bad to take a break.
Steve's here. I see Brandy isn't though. I'm not sure what happened.
Brandy is actually, she's going to let me know. Her camera keeps cutting out, but she has not missed any audio, I think. So she'll let me.
Okay. Yeah, well then if you'd like us to proceed, we will. So
no, Daniel, you want a break?
I'll take a 2-minute break if that's okay.
Let's
take a break. And I'll just catch up in 2 minutes. You're not going to say all the critical stuff in the first 2 minutes.
No, right? So I'm sorry that we're now having a discussion about having a short break.
Let's take a break until 8:15. I have 8:09, so let's just be back in 5 minutes. 8:14. How about?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Anyway, I'll call us back to order, however I do that, without a gavel. Thank you.
Great. May I proceed?
Yes, at 8:14.
Okay, so the topic is the water treatment plant replacement. And if that sounds like a big deal, it is. The current water treatment plant up in Pleasant Valley was constructed in 1989. That's 31 years ago. And the design life, the expected useful life of that plant, the building and the functioning water filtration processes inside it, the expected useful life was 20 years. By 2009, if it had been replaced in the sort of normal expected schedule of these types of facilities, the town would have replaced it by 2009. And we're here in 2020 talking about some additional steps necessary, the final few steps necessary in moving forward to actually replace it. That might suggest neglect, and it shouldn't. There's a fuller story to tell about why that happened. And it begins with planning to either upgrade or replace. We now are recommending strongly a replacement, and we'll get into those details as we go along here. But the planning to either upgrade or replace the existing water treatment plant began in 2003, 6 years before the end of the useful life of the original. But then there were other needs of the town that were competing with that. And so decisions were made over time, first to accommodate the sewer system and sewer plant upgrade, and then to proceed with the police fire facilities project. And just in terms of the ability of town taxpayers and ratepayers to pay for these significant generational improvements to our major facilities, the water plant, its turn had not yet come. But we, in ways that Steve Barrett is going to go into detail about here in a moment, while we were proceeding with the police fire facilities project, we were doing the resumed planning that had begun way back in 2003 and then been on hiatus for a long time. We have done a lot of planning work. It has involved mostly staff and technical work by Chrissy Haskins of Dufresne Group and other professionals who've assisted us in this process, and overview by the state. All of that's been going on, much of it behind the scenes and occasionally in visits to the select board when threshold decisions needed to be made. And again, Steve will review that history about the actions that have been taken, not only to bring this project along to where we are tonight, but also to protect and improve the other aspects of the water operation in town to make it so that the scope of this project we're talking about tonight isn't as great as it might have been. You'll recall with the sewage project, sewer system project, for instance, that it was a very large project of over $30 million, with about 20 million or so going at the plant, a very large project in its own right. But there were major other elements that were constructed as part of that same bond. Here we're focusing on the water plant because of decisions that have been made and actions that have been taken to already address other needs. And Steve will speak to those details. And when he's done and brought us up to date, then Chrissy will speak as our design engineer for this project, and somebody who has extensive knowledge of the town's water system and this plant and the options that have been reviewed that have been determined to be either more costly or less functional than what we're proposing tonight. She'll go into that greater level of detail about exactly the plan we would like to move forward with, and what the next steps in that process would be. So without further ado,
And, I just wanted to say welcome, Chrissy from Dufresne, and our own Steve and Dan. Normally when you enter an actual room, I get to introduce people, but I didn't get to this time. So we'll pass it over to Steve Barrett. Go ahead.
thank you.
Good evening. So just so the public knows, what we're talking about is the Pleasant Valley Water Treatment Plant, which is in West Brattleboro, nestled up in the hills. It's a beautiful spot. That, as Peter had said, that first water plant, our first filtration plant, was in 1989. So this is the original water treatment plant for the town of Brattleboro. Prior to that, all the water was gravity fed to town and just chlorinated, and that was it. So it's always been pretty interesting as you follow the history of the water system, and we've continued to, even after we upgraded, we've continued to explore options to improve the facility or to look at treatment systems to keep our water system up to date because of the health and the safety of the citizens. It's very important to have a good water supply. After the filtration plant was built, it performed very well. We didn't have any situations or problems with the plant at all. It corrected our discolored water that we had in town prior to the treatment plant. We also had to issue boil waters orders in the 1980s. People couldn't drink the water. So that's the importance of these water treatment systems. They're very important. As we entered into the 2000s, we started to see some problems with the structure that was put there. It was a pre-engineered building. And later on, Chrissy can talk about it a little bit, but the CAD system that they used at the time under-designed the roof. We had noticed that we had some complications with it. The operators all shoveled the roof in the winter. And from what we found out, that was a very good maintenance process that we followed to protect the integrity of the building. Some of the buildings that were actually designed at that time collapsed. So we've been quite fortunate. As we moved along into the 2000s, there was several times where we'd hired engineering and took a glimpse at upgrading the facility. And at one point in 2003, it was estimated to be a $5 million project. Later on, when there was stimulus money around 2009, there was estimated to be over $7 million at that time. The project, as we've gone through into the 2000s, there's always been discussions with the select board every year on the treatment plant, the process, and our intent to do upgrades. And as Peter said, you know, there's a lot of large projects in town that you know, took priority, and so the water treatment plant was working fine. So it's kind of put off to the side. Many of the members here in the board started supporting the investigation of looking at what it would take to upgrade the plant starting around 2018. We put money in the utilities capital budget, and you as water and sewer commissioners will review the utility budget here. That's what we're doing now. And also last year, there was additional money put in again to get to a preliminary engineering phase so that we could come up with an idea of what the cost would be. And that's where we sit today, is we've come up with a preliminary estimate of the cost. You know, it's almost $11 million, but there's 25% contingency. The engineers are being very conservative because we don't really know until you get into final design what the actual numbers will be. So with that, what we're looking at is to, you know, to actually get a loan to do a final design. And the final design is fairly complex. You know, it will involve all types of expertise, from electrical engineers to structural people, soils. There'll be technology put into the pumping systems. And so there's an array of expertise that goes along with this proposal that we're talking about to get money from the revolving loan fund. And also I'd like to note that in 2017, the board also approved an asset management plan, which was done by Dufresne also. And that was important to look at the life expectancy of the plant and all the components. And that's what led us up to where we are here today, to talk the planning loan and to talk about the upgrade of the water treatment plant. So with that, Christy, I would give her the floor so that she could explain the loan and the project itself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Chrissy, welcome. Take it away.
Hello, good evening. So, as Steve said, we've been working on this for quite a while. My company's been involved with the water treatment facility evaluation since it started in 1999. Over the years, there's been various projects and estimates developed for improvements to the treatment plant. And what we're looking at now is we have submitted a final preliminary engineering report to the state. And this is the most comprehensive evaluation of the water treatment facility to date. We took all of the previous evaluations into consideration and we built off of those and added on to them for this report. So what I'll do is I'll run through kind of a high-level summary of the report, go through what the proposed project includes and the costs and the funding for it. So in this report, we looked at different types of treatment. We invited Steve and some of the operators to come tour other treatment facilities to look at other methods. One of them more recently being membranes. Through all of this and looking at other treatment methods, we settled on sticking with the same method that you currently have, which is mixed media filtration. The reason for that is that this process has the lowest risk to the water system. We know that it adequately treats the source water. We know that it provides excellent finished water quality. The operators have the institutional knowledge of the system and they know how to operate it. If we were to switch treatment methods, that would require significant piloting, which is expensive. And piloting is for figuring out how a new method of treatment would react with your source water and what kind of chemicals and what doses of chemicals would be required. So that's kind of a lengthy, expensive process. And then there would also be a fairly significant learning curve for the operators to learn new equipment and processes. So since what you have is working and it's providing you with good water quality, we didn't find any reason to switch at this point, and the operators were on board with that. Also, the other reason for sticking with what you already have is that the filtration equipment that you have is still in good condition. Back in the 80s, when this plant was first constructed, the town made a very good decision to purchase stainless steel filters. A lot of towns went with cost savings and purchased painted steel filters. So in those cases, they're having to spend a significant amount of money to rehab or replace their actual tanks because the steel is rusting. So in your case, your stainless steel filters are actually in great condition, and they will be reused in the new plant with some minor refurbishment of some of the shorter lifespan components and the filter media. The tankage itself will actually not require any repairs. And so this saves a lot of money in terms of refurbishment and in construction sequencing. It makes it easier for us to switch over to a new plant. So as part of the report, we also looked at various building locations and types of buildings. As Steve noted, the existing building is not in great shape. There was an issue back in the 80s with the design software not putting out the right structural support sizes. And so the building actually has inadequate structural support. And so you've actually gotten a lot more out of it than other towns or other systems have out of their buildings. Additionally, the building is too small to accommodate additional treatment equipment needed for regulatory compliance. So we did look at putting an addition on the existing building and rehabbing the existing building to improve structural support, but ultimately decided on a new building, mainly because of the code compliance issues with rehabbing the old building. It would take us, from what our architect, he had some input during the preliminary phase, and his opinion was that he wasn't even sure it was possible to bring the old building up to current codes. So that pushed us towards the new building option, in that we could get the additional space we needed, we could make sure it was structurally sound, we could have it built to current codes, and we could reorganize it to provide a better streamlined flow through the plant. So back on the architect, I just wanted to note that on our team, we have the premier architect in Vermont for water treatment plants. This is what he does. It is very much a niche field in that it's very specific building codes and requirements for the treatment plants due to the chemicals and the processes that go on inside of it. And so he is very familiar with those requirements. He's also familiar with the existing building because he's been there to evaluate it. And he's actually the one who came up with the identifying the deficiencies for it. So he is currently evaluating different building types to determine which type of building will provide the town with the long-term, durable, and sustainable solution. The concept is that during your next 20-year upgrade, 20 years from now, when you're looking at what do you need to do to your treatment plant, we want to provide you with a building that you don't have to replace in 20 years. You'll have to replace some of the components within inside the building, the mechanical and electrical components, but not the building itself. I want to talk a little bit about energy efficiency. The new building will be more energy efficient than existing. A large part of this is that the equipment and technology inside of the building will be new, and typically newer equipment is more energy efficient than older equipment. So this includes lighting, HVAC, all the pumps that are used in the building and actually in the raw water pump station as well. The existing setup uses variable frequency drives on all the pumps, and we will continue to do that. That provides, that allows us to run the pumps at lower speeds, whereas if we didn't have those variable frequency drives, the pumps would run full speed all the time. So those are an energy saving measure. And another large component of energy efficiency is insulation. The building codes have changed significantly over the past 30 years, and today's buildings require a lot more insulation than what the original plant has. And then lastly, we're going to coordinate with Efficiency Vermont during final design for a review of the design and guidance on energy efficiency options. In terms of operator efficiency, there's going to be a new SCADA system provided with the building, included in the final design. And for those of you who don't know what SCADA is, that's what controls the plant. It actually controls the entire water system. So it stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. So it's how everything gets controlled. The pumps, it's how the pumps know when to turn on. It's how the filters know when to start up. It's how the pump stations in the system turn on when they sense low pressure in the area that they're serving. So this is a system-wide piece of it's a lot of equipment, and it's system-wide. And we're actually going to be including a full SCADA upgrade in this project. So that's not just going to be at the treatment plant. That'll be at every water pump station, tank, down at the Public Works building. So everywhere that we can access the water system SCADA, that'll be upgraded. So that new SCADA system is going to provide, it's going to improve efficiency in operation of the plant, operation of other components in the system, like the pump stations and tanks, and also make it easier for the operators to complete their daily and monthly reports. And it's also going to allow for increased automated operation of the plant. In terms of sustainability, as I've noted, we're we're looking to provide you with a long-lasting and durable building. And then the plant is also being designed with consideration to potential future water regulations. So we've spoken with the drinking water regulatory engineers and talked to them about what might be coming along in the next 10 or 20 years in terms of regulations. And now this is really hard to predict, but they gave us some ideas of things to look at. And so we're going to be providing excess space in the treatment plant and in the raw water pump station for potential future chemical feed systems. And we're going to be providing provisions to make it easy to connect future activated carbon feed. That was a pretty high priority for the state, and it's fairly simple to provide those provisions to just make it easy to connect that in the future. We also evaluated the need for other types of treatment in regard to other regulations, but we found that and the state agreed that those would be unnecessary. So in terms of cost, we're looking at an estimate of about 11 million, 10.9. This includes several components. So this includes temporary utilities and site work to keep the existing plant operational during construction. The new plant is going to be constructed pretty close to the existing plant, but we do want to keep that existing plant in operation to save costs on having to provide a temporary treatment plant, which can get expensive. A new, larger building, which will include a maintenance area and room for storage of the equipment used up at the treatment plant. We're going to be refurbishing the 3 existing filters and adding a new 4th filter for regulatory compliance. All of the chemical feed systems, raw water pumps, finished water pumps, valves, piping, and all other pertinent equipment is going to be replaced. It'll all be new. There'll be new electrical and instrumentation components. And as I noted, there'll be a full system-wide SCADA upgrade, which includes all of the connections at the pump stations and tanks and control valves and at public works. There'll be considerations for future activated carbon feed. We have included in the preliminary engineering report the cost to add fluoride to the water. Now, the addition of fluoride actually requires a vote by the town. It can't just be added. Like Steve and I can't just go add it. It does require a vote. So we did include the price in there if that is something that that the town is interested in. The price is in there for it, but if the vote doesn't pass, then we just don't include it. Or if there is no vote, then we don't include it. And then there's also the modification of the processed waste handling. This is the wastewater that comes out of the filters after they clean themselves. Right now it goes into settling lagoons, and those lagoons require annual cleaning. So we'll be, as part of this project, putting in an equalization basin, and then the town crew, the utilities crew, is going to be doing the sewer main extension on their own for cost savings, and that will allow processed waste to be transmitted down to the wastewater treatment plant instead of having to maintain those lagoons. The contingency, as Steve noted, is at 25%. That's fairly typical for treatment plants at preliminary stage, just because there is a lot of detail that gets worked out in the final design stage. That 25% equates to almost $2 million. It's about $1.9 million. So that's $1.9 million in contingency. And as we work through the design and finalize details, we will reduce that percentage for the final cost estimate. That $11 million number also includes the design and construction phase engineering. So this brings us to the planning loan application that's before you tonight. Just a little background on that. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, we abbreviate that as DWSRF. So the DWSRF planning loan is a 0% interest loan, and that loan would ultimately be wrapped into a construction loan after the completion of the project. And I know we're not going to get into talking too much about the construction funding at this point, but I just wanted to provide a little background for reference. Once we get to construction, we are anticipating utilizing the DWSRF construction loan program. And for this project, we're estimating a 0% interest rate for 30 to 40 year term with a 25% subsidy. Now the state doesn't use the DWSRF program. They don't use the word grant. They use the word subsidy. So that would basically be a 25% grant. There is some speculation that the federal government will issue stimulus funding targeted towards construction of infrastructure, similar to the ERA funding that was issued in 2009 after the 2008 recession. And this funding is really to spur along construction to get people working. And so that's something that the regional commissions and the state agencies are really thinking is going to happen. So if this does happen, we may be able to obtain a higher grant percentage for construction. And so we are staying on top of this, and we will be keeping Peter and Steve up to date as information becomes available. Back to the planning loan. The planning loan application is for $480,000. So this would be the final design fee. This includes not only Dufresne Group services for civil engineering and process engineering, but this also includes subconsultants for architectural, structural, mechanical, and electrical designs. These subconsultants account for over 60% of our design fee. This fee also includes all of the permitting required for construction. This project would require 8 permits in total, including an Act 250 permit. And it includes funding assistance for the submittal of the construction loan application and coordinating with the funding agency. So with all of that information, do you have any questions?
Thank you for all that information. I have one. Who has a question?
May I add one fact before we go to questions? Is that all right? Thank you. Sorry, but I just want to put in context, this loan and this effort that Chrissy just designed will lead to then the final design and engineer's cost estimate for actually moving to construction of the plant. And we expect to actually reach that point late this year and be in position where you would make decisions about what to move forward with to town meeting. And then representative town meeting would actually make the decision to proceed with the project. We're hopeful that all of that will occur in the next 12 months so that as we head into the summer of 2021, we're heading into construction of the project.
Thank you, Peter. Liz, did I see that you had your hand about to go up? Okay.
Yes. Okay, so I have 2 questions. Steve, you can decide whether you want to answer or ask Chrissy. It's been my experience just comparing this large expense with a fire truck, and I was horrified to find that you can't buy a fire truck off the shelf. It needs to be kind of handmade, tailor-made for a community. And so I was wondering if the same thing applies to water treatment plant, or are there cost savings and efficiencies associated with getting components kind of off the shelf? I know the large expense of this seems to be the building itself, but are there efficiencies with that, or is this design kind of a handmade design?
Well, I'd like Chrissy give you details, but for instance, the filters that we purchased way back in 1989 are still being used. So a lot of this, the components in this facility are common parts that can be bought off the shelf. As far as customizing the plant, that's pretty much customized for the location and the size of the plant, which, you know, the architects will take into consideration. But as far as the components, the pumps, the controls, the filters, generators, boilers, all the heating systems, that's pretty much standard equipment that can be used in any factory or any other place. Chrissy?
Yes, as Steve said, a lot of these components are off-the-shelf components. It's just a matter of sizing them properly for your plant. If we were starting from scratch and didn't have a proven treatment method, then there would be a lot more customized design work to do. But in this case, we know that your treatment method works. We don't have to go into a lot of customization on that. We're going to optimize a few things in your treatment process, but the actual equipment will all be pretty much off the shelf type of equipment.
Great. And I just have one other question. I see in the application that current maintenance costs are like 1.8 million and would go the following year to over 2 million. When you have a new facility, will the maintenance costs be less?
So the estimate in those numbers in the application are considering inflation. So typically we inflate your operating expenses at 3% per year, just because we don't know what's going to happen. So right now we're kind of just holding steady at what you're already operating at, and that's for the entire system, not just for the plant. And so we are just inflating at 3% per year. And I think the post-project operation expense in the application is for the year of fiscal year 2023, because that would be the post-project year.
So the fact that it's a brand new building and so forth doesn't provide maintenance savings?
The operation cost will probably still be the same. There will be some maintenance savings, and Steve might be able to go into more detail on these, but for example, the lagoons won't need to be maintained anymore because we're going to get rid of them.
Right, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, that's a huge saving. It's $20,000 to $25,000 plus a year just in disposal costs that go down to the wasteline, could be treated at the wastewater treatment plant. The other thing is with this facility is we're upgrading the facility. We're adding a filter. Currently, we produce about 1.3 to 1.4 million gallons a day, 500 million gallons a year out of this facility. Our peak is 2 million gallons a day. So what we need is an additional filter, so that if one filter if one filter was out of service right now, we could be in trouble if we had a peak flow. And peak flow could be because of drought, dry weather, or fires. So this facility will we'll have 4 filters instead of 3. And the other thing that we might be able to do is run these filters at a lower rate, so the pumps aren't working as hard, get a better filtered product, and maybe that can save some energy also. But also with the new drives and the new motors and the new pumps, the technology's changed so much and focused on energy over the years. We're very hopeful that we can get some savings there. The project will go through Efficiency Vermont, and they'd be filtered also through our own expertise here in town to see what we can do to save as far as energy savings and cost.
Well, and I thank you for that. And I think it's a very important project.
Yes, I don't know about everyone else. Steve actually answered my one question, which was about the extra filter. I was kind of curious if that was sort of regulatory forced upon us or anticipatory of regulations coming up, but it sounds like it's prudent.
It's not only prudent, it's regulatory. They've changed the rules since we built the facility. So currently, again, if we had one filter down, we wouldn't be compliant.
Okay.
We wouldn't be able to keep up with the demand. So that alone is good enough reason to add the other filter, but it is regulatory also.
Yeah, the aspect of firefighting was not something I had considered, but it's a no-brainer that you would need to continuously supply a lot of water for a little while.
And the other thing I want to note is when we talk about these costs, the select board has been supportive of other projects in the utilities to keep the cost of this project down. One example would be Black Mountain Tank. It was a 1 million gallon tank and it was approximately $1 million job. We paid for that as we went along. The board made the decision not to get a loan, to use the funds that we had available and to upgrade that tank so that when we knew in the future that we'd have to be coming up against a larger project and we could keep the cost down. The waste line's another example of that. And also when we go over the capital budget, you'll see that we're going to rehab one of the 3 million gallon tank at Pleasant Valley to keep the cost down of the overall project. So many of these things, even all the engineering up to this point, has been paid for as we went along with no loans. So I think that's important to note, that overall picture was to try to keep the cost of the larger project down and not be paying a loan, paying for a loan for many years on a larger sum of money.
Does anyone else have questions? Actually, I expect, Peter, did you want to circle back to the financing or?
We can. It looked like Ian had something, either a question or a comment, and I'm happy to.
And maybe Daniel?
Very, very quick question. I was just surprised that, Steve, as you're saying, like the technology has changed a lot, but that the filtration system is still the same that we're going to use based on the one that was built in the 80s. I'm just curious if we weren't replacing a water filtration plant and we were just building a brand new one somewhere, would the filtration system that we're going to be putting into this one be considered for like a brand new plant as well? Is it still a piece of a type of technology that is currently being put into brand new systems?
Yeah, it is. This technology is still being used. The filters are still being sold. And how we got there with this particular filtration plant is we actually, Chrissy had talked about the savings of having our treatment plant not have to do pilot tests, because now we know how to treat the water. Well, we spent almost a year testing the water. We actually built a temporary facility at Pleasant Valley before the treatment plant was built, and they tried different treatment processes. And this led us all back, after testing the water and filtering it, back to the type of filters, these Trident sand filters that we have. So if we're going to start with a brand new plant, we may be looking at membrane filtration, which was pretty interesting. We went up to Hanover, New Hampshire, and looked at their facility. It's all membrane, which was fascinating. But then it would cost us more money. We'd be starting over, and plus we've invested in these filters that we can reuse. So it seems practical to stick to the technology that works.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I had the reason I was thinking maybe Peter wanted to kick back over, but let me just, Chrissy, did you said that the state is basically as part of the DWSRF, do I have that acronym right? Is that they're basically providing, if we go through the process that you're planning on, they're providing 25% of the funding for the project?
So this year, for their construction projects, they are offering a first come, first serve 25% subsidy. And so timing is going to be pretty critical on it. But the state, the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division and the Water Investment Division, who administers the DWSRF funding, are both supportive that this is a very high priority project for them. So we are hopeful that we'll be getting that 25% subsidy.
Okay.
And then possibly also, as Chrissy mentioned, depending on what comes down the pike from the federal stimulus as part of coming out of COVID, there's a by doing this final design and getting shovel ready, we'll be positioned well to try to take advantage of that program, whatever it becomes. I mean, that's obviously not defined at this time, but we would expect that would be grant money. So each one of those grants obviously shrinks the amount that we would need to borrow. And then because this is a heavily subsidized, I'm sorry to use that word when it actually has meaning as a grant in this program, but because this is meant to make it affordable. These are expensive projects and they're recognized to be expensive projects, but they're also essential for public health and safety. So back in maybe the 60s, but certainly the 70s, the federal government started to pump a lot of money through the state governments down to these kinds of projects to encourage communities and to do them initially, and then to meet requirements of like the Safe Water Act and other regulatory provisions that communities couldn't afford to do these on their own. So these revolving loan funds are just like how our program income works with local businesses, right? This money goes out and it's used to create a project like this for a community that desperately needs it because we've come to the end of the life cycle of our prior plant. Meanwhile, somebody else is in the middle of their life cycle, but by the time that we've paid back, millions of dollars, if we borrow 8 million, by the time we've paid back 4, somebody else is ready to use that 4 to put into their plant, and it just goes on and on that way. And because of that, there's actually been circumstances, and I don't begin to understand the nuances of how this works to why at different times it is even more advantageous, but it's always affordable. In this case, right now, the prevailing rates are 0%. So we're just borrowing the money, but not having to pay interest on it. And then there's the grant portion. In the sewer financing for the $30 million of borrowing the town did for those projects, there was actually a portion of that had negative interest attached to it. We were being paid revenue into the utility system on the money a portion of the money we had borrowed to upgrade the system. And so it's sometimes hard to understand exactly how those rules arise, but that's why we lean on somebody like Chrissy and her firm to be able to steer us at the right time to the right tool. And this looks like we're fortunate. We've had the other reasons why we've done other things along the way, and now this has become an urgent need, but it's become an urgent need at a fortuitous moment because the financing environment looks positive for us.
Great. And my final note/question for you, Peter, is just can you remind us, we've been pretty fiscally prudent over on the water sewer side, much to the chagrin of some of our ratepayers, obviously. But so we've been building up some cash reserves for this exact purpose. Do you want to just put an approximate frame around that for us?
Absolutely. So we had built up to about $5 million balance in the utility fund. You'll recall that this current year we're in, we kept rates flat. So we're actually drawing down off of that a little bit. But that was a very conscious thing to do because we had built up to a high level. We knew already enough about this project. While we didn't know that it would be estimated at 10.9, we knew enough about it a year ago to expect that it was going to cost more than the cash we had available in any event. There was going to be some borrowing, and we knew that the programs for borrowing are, affordable. They're good tools in the way that we just talked about, how you borrow money and you either pay a very low interest rate or no interest rate at all. And so, so last year, what we did was we decided to take that year off while we got to this point of understanding better what these costs were going to be, with the expectation that there would be some cash component and a large borrowing component to moving forward to actually implement. We've got a lot to go over with you in the next couple of meetings regarding the other capital needs of the system and the operating cash flow of the system, both on the water side and the sewer side, but particularly on the water side with these changes and these upgrades. And so we'll get into more detail at that time, but our ask this evening is that you allow us to borrow this $480,000 so we can proceed with the final design on the water plant. And then the decision making regarding, whether the rates stay the same or whether there is a rate adjustment in FY21 will be made in part based on the financial implications of this project and in part based on the variety of other factors in the fund. And we'll be better prepared to have a good detailed conversation with you about that starting on the 19th.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments, or would someone like to go forward and make the first of some very important motions? I will say that I haven't seen anybody say that they needed to jump in with a question. So if anyone is on the phone that I'm not seeing, please just go ahead and open up and ask your question. Otherwise, I think we're going to roll forward. Great. Does anybody want to make a motion?
Oh, I'll make the motion. I forgot that we had motions going on in this meeting.
Little life.
Let's see. I move to approve the application for a drinking water state revolving fund planning loan of $480,000 to complete the final design of the Pleasant Valley water treatment plant replacement project.
Thank you, Daniel. Daniel's made a motion to approve the application for a drinking water state revolving fund planning loan of $480,000 to complete the final design of the Pleasant Valley water treatment plant replacement project. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is that? Okay. That's 5-0. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chrissy.
Thank you.
And Dan.
Chrissy's going to stay with us, and so is Steve for the next item as well.
Yes.
It just feels monumental, so I wanted to
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we do have to talk about Signal Hill Pump Station Replacement Project, which is an important component of the whole picture here. Peter?
Steve, why don't you take it away?
Oh,
thank you.
Okay, so Signal Hill Pump Station is up off of Guilford Street, and that originally was a private development that was designed. It's a water pump station designed to feed homes on Signal Hill and Hillcrest Terrace. The original pump station was put in the 1970s, and then it was basically taken over by the town after the roadway was done and the pump station was completed. And we've owned and operated that station since 1970. We had a survey done we have a survey done by the state to look at all our pump stations and our water treatment plant to make sure that we're staying compliant. And this pump station was identified a couple of years ago as being deficient. It doesn't really meet the standards of anything today. It's really outdated. And so we began the process to do a preliminary engineering design, which was over a year ago. And that brought us to a place where we had to look to see where we could place a new pump station. The existing pump stations really put on a little thumbprint of land. It's I don't think it's much more than 10 by 20. piece of land that the pump station's on itself. So there was a lot available, a building lot that was available that had not been built on just above the pump station that we feel would be suited well for a pump station that could be constructed for today's needs and also build out for tomorrow's needs. And then we would take the old pump station and decommission that. So the first ask is to purchase that lot, a piece of property. It's assessed by the town, has a tax value of $47,000, and that's what we've been able to come up with an agreement with the current owner to purchase it for. So our first ask is to purchase this piece of property for $47,000 for the pump station. And then the second ask is for engineering. So I don't know if we want to take these into two steps, or we want to do one at a time, or do you want me to explain the pump station? I've kind of summarized it okay, I think, at this point, but it's your call.
If you have anything extra for the services agreement, you could just lay that out for us. Any extra information that, because they're so closely related, I think it makes sense to.
Sure. So then the second part of that is we've done a preliminary engineering, and this would be to continue an engineering relationship with Dufresne Group for $51,000 for a final design of the pump station that is estimated to be approximately $300,000. So that's what we'd like to do is, and this would be out of the utilities capital fund. You'll see that as we go through the capital for the engineering and also for the proposed upgrade of $300,000. So the first part is to purchase the property, and the second part is to authorize us to enter into an engineering agreement with Dufresne for $51,000.
Thank you. And despite the uncomfortable nature of asking this question while a representative from Dufresne is here with us, I'm sure, I feel like I must ask the question that you have full confidence in this being the right firm to use for the project.
Yes, it's, you know, Dufresne, we go back a while in our relationship, and they have a complete model of our water system. And so they have a lot of the tools already, which at this point saves the town money, instead of bringing other firms in that would have to start from square one. This isn't uncommon. There's many towns that utilize the services of an engineering firm and continue that relationship because of the historical knowledge and the knowledge of the current system. So we feel it's beneficial for the town to enter into an engineering agreement for this pump station with Dufresne.
Thank you. See, Chrissy, I only asked that question to make sure he could say nice things about Dufresne. So, any board members have any questions, comments? Liz, come on, you're a planner.
Nope.
Okay. And then if not, I'll take the motions one at a time, then we'll vote on that.
I'll make a motion.
Thanks.
I'll make both of them if you like.
Sure, why not? If
Okay.
there's no objection.
I move to authorize the expenditure of $47,000 to purchase lot 00110356.200 on Guilford Street to be the site of the replacement Signal Hill pump station. Do you want me to do the other one now or vote on it?
Let's go ahead and vote. Liz has made a motion to authorize the expenditure of $47,000 for said lot on Guilford Street to be the site of the replacement Signal Hill pump station. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. And that's 5-0. Thank you.
Okay, so I also move to authorize Town Manager Elwell to execute an engineering services agreement with the Dufresne Group for final design of the Signal Hill pump station for a fee of $51,000.
Thanks, Liz. Liz has made a motion to authorize town manager to execute a engineering services agreement with Dufresne Group for final design of the Signal Hill pump station for a fee of $51,000. All those in favor, say aye.
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 And that passes 5-0 once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now talking about an overall utilities fund capital projects update.
We are.
And who would like to do that?
I'll do a very brief introduction, and then Steve will do the majority of it, along possibly with Dan. I'm not sure whether how they're going to share that. And I just have a quick question before I dive in. Chrissy, are you staying on? Will you have anything to add in this discussion, or are we thanking you and saying good night?
I think Steve and Dan can probably handle this.
Great.
Good night, Chrissy.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Chrissy.
you very much, Chrissy.
So,
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
thank you.
Good night.
So the table setting I wanted to do on this is very brief, but just to make clear where this fits into, the big decisions that you've made this evening, and then the sort of still big but routine annual process we're going to go through over the next 2 or 3 meetings of looking at the entire utility fund budget and looking at the rate ordinance, which will need to be either continued for a year under the current terms or increased, and we'll be looking at the math and the choices and helping you make that decision beginning on May 19th and then continuing at least on June 2nd and likely on June 16th as well. So tonight, in preparation for that, we thought it'd be important as an informational item. This one doesn't require you to make a decision, but as background to those discussions, seeing where we stand with a variety of different capital projects within the utilities fund, some still in planning stages, getting ready to be constructed, some actually further along than that, and others as ideas of things that'll probably be proposed in the actual capital program within the utilities fund budget for next year. So this is just meant to be that sort of broad perspective update of where we stand on the capital side before we dive into operating next 2 weeks from tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to kick it off, and then Dan's also going to jump in here with some of these projects. Again, as Peter just explained, this is just to provide the board with kind of a summary. And if you have any questions, let us know, but of the capital plan. So the capital plan, we've talked enough about the Pleasant Valley Water Treatment Facility and the construction of the new pump station at Signal Hill. And the other thing the board has heard about, because you approved grants, is the Exit 1 Industrial Park utility upgrades there. So those are some of the bigger projects. Also, what's going on with the Vermont Agency of Transportation, the Hinsdale Bridge replacement, that includes water main work. So there's just a lot of projects going on here in the utilities. Again, some of these projects, as Peter stated, are ready to go. And if there is recovery fund money, we will seek that out for any of these projects because we're in a good place because they're ready to go. But these are projects that we're going to talk about as we get into the budget a little further. So again, the Pleasant Valley, I don't think I need to cover that anymore. I think we've been very thorough with that. The Pleasant Valley waste line, that's the one that's going to save us approximately $20,000 to $34,000 a year by the waste going to the wastewater treatment plant from the water treatment plant. And that project is estimated about $300,000, which is quite a bit less than what it would be on a contract. This is the one that Christy had talked about, the utilities division crew themselves installing the line. And there's 2 reasons we want to do that. One is to save money. The other is the sensitivity of putting this line in right next to our 2 water mains that feed the whole town. We want to make sure due caution's taken that, because if there's a problem, it could be catastrophic. With that, Dan, would you pick it up from there with Exit 1?
Yeah, the Exit 1 is the ongoing project with the US EDA grant. We're that's really carried over from last year. We're hoping that's going to go out to bid in June. There's funds in both the water and the sewer side of it to cover, and then there'll be a reimbursement for the grant of 50% of the funds. From there, the two big water main plants coincide with the VTrans projects happening. The first one is the redesign of Putney Road. Green International is the consultant that is working with VTrans on that, and they've identified numerous areas where the water and sewer mains need to be relocated in order for the project to happen. That responsibility falls back on us. Green International has done a lot of the work already, and currently we are talking to them. We'll probably come back to you with an engineering agreement to work with them to continue engineering our portion of that project. Same with the Hinsdale Bridge project. We've done a lot of the engineering with Dufresne on that. Same sort of thing. There's a bunch of, we've got to relocate our water main and some sewer main there that is our responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
That's Signal Hill we pretty much covered, Dan. So what about the wastewater treatment plant cover?
Yep, the cover at the wastewater treatment plant is part of the odor evaluation that was done a couple years ago. We just reviewed the 90% documents with the consultant on that, and we're hoping to put that one out to bid soon. Again, those funds were set aside for that project last year, and it just didn't happen. So we're hoping for that one soon. Sewer mains and interceptor tightening. That's really aimed at the interceptor from West Brattleboro that runs down the whetstone. Every year we do evaluation of a certain amount of the manholes and make repairs as needed. Vehicles, we have a capital plan for the vehicles and a replacement plan. This year we actually are shuffling it around a little bit. We've identified a loader and a truck that are in better shape than we expected. So we're gonna try to push those out a couple years and replace a couple of the compact cars that the water and wastewater plant use. The water plant in particular, Pleasant Valley Road's taking its toll on the car. So we're looking at something that may handle it a little better, and we're looking at hybrid options for those. Water meters, that's another annual one. Every year we replace a certain amount of water meters just to keep the rotation so that we don't end up with a bunch of old meters that need to be replaced all at once. And the tank resurfacing at Pleasant Valley we talked about earlier. That was another one that was aimed at reducing the scope of the redesign and rebuild of the plant. So we're working to get some specs on that to get that out to bid as well.
And that aeration project, Dan, we're going to remove?
Right. As the design for the Pleasant Valley plant progressed, they realized that the aeration that they hoped to use to reduce the manganese wasn't going to be an effective method of treatment. So we're going to remove that from the plan.
And there you go. That's your quick summary. Not too painful. Moving right along.
Yeah, it's a lot going on in your department.
Thank you, Dan.
Now, Dan, that wasn't a backdoor criticism of the road condition when you mentioned that. Because I know who you can talk to.
On the highway.
It's responsible for both, so.
Yeah.
Like a snake eating its own tail.
Just a fact of life, not a criticism.
Yeah.
Vermont truism. Well, I certainly appreciate the putting off of new vehicles when we have a vehicle that'll last another year or two.
Couple, hopefully.
And it would be nice to add, I think it's your department that has the electric vehicle that we have now, right?
We do.
We've been happy with that.
We have I don't think our engineer, I don't think he's used 5 gallons of gas. I mean, seriously, it runs on the electric the whole time. It's a hybrid, but
That
you know,
Josh?
Dan, it's minimal. He has the records. It's incredible. It's really incredible. So we're looking at, years ago, what we'd done is we'd taken pickup trucks and we bought Chevy Cobalts, which were, you know, did 32 miles per gallon or 40. And then we continued that theme with the existing cars. And now we're looking at taking another step and going to some hybrid or all electric. So
Nice.
just continue. It seems to make sense. These are the, you know, the wastewater treatment when they're out pumping, checking the pumping stations, or the water treatment when they're out getting water tests. These vehicles make a lot of sense. As Dan said, sometimes seasonally we get, you know, we can't really take them out during mud season and things of that nature. So, but we've been able to work around it and been successful, and it's saved a lot of money. So we support that program.
Yeah, bicycles too, don't you, Steve?
We've tried the bicycles, and we haven't done the purchase yet, but we're close. We went to both of the cycle shops here in town, and they gave us a bike to try, which was fun for the employees at Public Works. You know, they're a little shy about getting on them at first, but they're quite a machine. It was after one did it, then they all had to take it for a ride. So we had it for about a week, and it was one of the cargo bikes. And so we feel that we can use that even if we have seasonal help painting hydrants, or, you know, we talked about water meters. So there's all kinds of use. We expect that we'll probably get like 2 of them.
Cool.
That's great. And I wanted to let everybody know, because we can see it if you're participating on the go-to meeting. You can see that Brandy says she's having a little trouble with her camera and computer.
But I'm still here. I'm here.
Just want to let people know, because if you're watching on YouTube or later, you can't see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great. Well, that was a great summary. Does anybody else have anything? I don't see anybody chiming in who wants to say anything in the chat room. And we don't need a motion for this.
Thank you, Dan. It's Brandy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Steve.
Thank you.
So, do we have any other business? I don't think so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I will take a motion to adjourn. Should anybody
So
like
moved.
to?
Do we have to adjourn as water and sewer commissioners before we adjourn as the select board?
I'll adjourn as water and sewer commissioners.
Yes, let's adjourn.
That's not a bad idea. It's a technical detail, but it's not a bad idea, just to be purists.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'll make a motion to adjourn as water and sewer commissioners.
All those in favor of adjourning as water and sewer commissioners?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0. And that leaves another motion for someone else to make.
Now the one big one.
I double adjourn. I see your adjourn and I raise you.
John's not gonna like that.
Nice.
Jan won't like that. Liz has made a motion to adjourn the meeting of April 5th, 2020. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, guys, but I can still see you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Stay well.